Go.
Okay.
Go.
We're off. Excellent.
Hello.
And welcome to Lorebeards.
Hello. If y'all could please let me know if you could hear us. That would be great.
Zinch.
Because anytime that we take it for granted, we always end up having it where like one of the streams is like super delayed. Okay, we're good.
Yeah, we've got the Lorebeards banner up, so it seems right to say Lorebeards, even though strictly this is literally nothing to do with Lorebeards at all.
You know, we have beards. It's lore related. It's whatever. It's close enough.
It's in a similar ballpark, right? Close to beside the playground. Yeah. Hey, all.
Yes, welcome everyone to another Wednesday night stream. I think the first official time that we've done back-to-back week-wise for the Wednesday night stream, so that's great. Tonight should be a fun one as we're going to be coming to the last of the siblings for Tamurkhan, which is going to be really exciting, ending it with Zinch, who is, in my opinion, by far going to be the most difficult one for like a whole bunch of reasons. Because Zinch is tricky, and I mean that both in universe and out of universe. For all sorts of reasons.
Agreed. Not only is Tzeentch tricky, we're coming at Tzeentch at the end of already having designed, or at least put in place along beside another, 3 other brothers, which means that we need to create something that's not only unique and interesting as far as Tzeentch is concerned, we've also got to create something that's unique and interesting in terms of what has already been added to the 3 other brothers. So we have a couple of rules, as we did in our previous ones as well. And these are largely the same. First, we are looking to build a brother of Tamurkhan, in this case, Tzeentch's brother. And this brother is going to go through various, let's say, travails, various problems. He'll have large mountains to climb until eventually he arrives at whatever we decide his throne is that he's looking for. What's most important from this is that the various characters that he encounters, the various armies that build around him, and the armies that he faces are different substantially to the ones we had before. Also, we are looking to build 3 primary factions. Faction number 1 is the Tzeentch faction. Faction number 2 is the primary antagonist faction, and this faction should be something that's already in the Warhammer world, but that Warhammer Fantasy Battle 8th edition did not tackle. Now, that doesn't mean that it can't be something that's been covered in another game, but broadly speaking, we're looking for something that is definitely in the setting already. It's not something new. We don't want to be trying to create Nippon. We don't want to be going, let's do the Kingdoms of Ind or any nonsense like that. We're looking at something that is already established in the lore, but has not had a lot of examination put into it. We're also looking for at least one other faction as well that we can add a little bit of detail to and boost up in a fun way. Think, for example, back to Tamurkhan, where we got the Nuln faction dropped in, we got our Chaos Dwarf faction dropped in, and we got, of course, good old Tamurkhan's Nurgle forces too. 3 primary army lists that we can work on. So we're looking at an antagonist, a potential ally, and the core Tzeentch force themselves. But just to make sure that we are 100% clear here, we are looking to try and avoid stories that feel like the loose stories that we've built already. We want this one to feel unique, interesting, and ultimately very, very Tzeentch. With our second rule, this is Forge World that we're building this for, which means we need a big fuck-off monster for the actual Tamurkhan brother himself. It's something that whenever you bring it out into the table, everyone goes, holy shit, that's a big huge giant ogre on top of a toad dragon. Holy fuck sticks, I'm in trouble. And equally, we're looking for whatever factions that we add to be tackleable to a degree by Forge World and to have a couple of really big bits that feels like something that Forge World might have made. Now, obviously, through the course of this stream, we are going to be building something that is so unlike anything Forge World would have built. It's silly because we obviously are looking at different types of stories. We have different aims in mind, and we are also not concerned about sales or what sort of miniatures can and can't be made. We're only interested in one thing: what's cool and what's different. So with all of that in place, I shall then pass you over to good old Sotek to add anything else he feels is important to cover.
Yeah, so the only things that I would add is that we also are running with the theme of that each of the brothers is heavily mutated. So trying to come up with like a really unique design, and trying to avoid falling into the easy trap of just importing a 40k concept or making a character who is just like an alternate but better version of something we already have within the setting. Because it's really easy to fall into that, the whole of people being like, oh, well, Zinch is this, so we should do the obvious thing. It's like, yeah, but we've already done that with, say, your Village or your Kairos Fate Weaver or your Ahriman from 40k. So trying to dodge around those and create something that's really unique and different, which I think we've done a really good job of so far with the other two brothers that we created alongside Tamurkhan. So I think that's...
We've got an engineer and a shrine.
Yeah. So yeah, we did some good stuff. But so I think without further ado, we're ready to go ahead and get started with a lot. I see a ton of super chats already just before we even get started. Just as a reminder that we'll kind of do them in batches, and if y'all end up producing them faster than we can catch up with them, eventually we'll like put a stopper in it so we can actually get some talking done. But today should be fun. I know everyone's going to have to pull their heads out of all of the Total War announcements and go back into discussing some other announcements, but let's get into it. So, Nightbringer, thank you very much for the generosity. Really appreciate it. Zinch brother.
Thank you so much, Nightbringer.
Yeah, for the Zinch brother, I was thinking he would be terrified of the prophecy of the Throne of Chaos, as he could be a seer and has seen Be'lakor winning in the end, and was trying to avoid it, with one of those attempts being the fantasy version of the rubric of Ahriman turning him to dust. So I will say that the latter half of that I would pretty heavily put under the categorization of probably want to avoid repeating a theme that we see in another Games Workshop setting. Even if it's AOS or 40k, I still think it's worth trying to make something that really is unique and stands out on its own. However, I think the idea that you have a character who is actively trying to subvert or avoid the prophecy instead of trying to fulfill it or pursuing it, like we see with the other three, is an idea that could potentially be messed with, of someone who has... One of the interesting things about prophecy within Warhammer Fantasy is that it can be a pretty nasty experience for everybody involved. And generally speaking, when you have a smart character dealing with prophecies, they tend to approach it in a very different way than your characters like Tamurkhan, who very aggressively pursue it, or with our other two characters who we kind of talked about that their experiences with it are different than outright trying to avoid or mess with it in some fashion, which tends to be a very Zinchian thing. Like I will always purport it as the amazing thing that it is, but if you go watch the LAWhammer roleplay series on the LAWhammer channel, one of the things you'll see is characters really wrestling with the concept of prophecy, and how when you have a bunch of factions dealing with the prophecy, you have some individuals that are trying to make sure it comes to fruition, so they're making sure that everything mentioned in the prophecy is still around and happening, whereas you have others deliberately trying to screw it up somehow. And it leads to a lot of really, really fun shenanigans, which is an idea we can definitely consider when looking at this particular storyline.
So I've got a couple of points in this one as well. So we're looking for the Tzeentch brother, which obviously means that change should be pretty much hard-coded, embedded into this character somehow, in the same way that the concept of disease was hard-coded into Tamurkhan. And many go, well, Tamurkhan, he was a maggoty worm thing. He was a parasite. That is a type of disease. So we want to have change hard-coded in here. So if we have a quick look there, your core thrust here is we have prophecy, and change is being applied to prophecy. This feels very Zinch. It feels almost stereotypical Zinch. This is something that is often brought up amongst writers in particular about what Zinch is out there doing. So the whole seer stroke Zinch thing is a common thread, and that doesn't mean it's a bad one. It's just a common one. And has seen Be'lakor winning. Now, that's a big one, because if he's seen Be'lakor winning, then there is no need to pursue the throne or be afraid of it, because he knows what occurs. It would be better just killing Be'lakor, or being part of the process that first encages Be'lakor. And that could be the first step towards understanding this character. This character could be one of the Zinch minions that was helpful and responsible or a part of the encaging of Be'lakor and wrapping Be'lakor up in the chains that Tzeentch wraps Be'lakor into. That would be one thing we could take from this is perhaps a little different to what might be interpretation. The next one is to try and avoid it, and then potentially the rubric of Ahriman. Now, I think the idea is sound, but I would, as Sotek say, very strongly try to avoid bringing up something that has such a strong 40k, not just everybody who knows 40k will know the story, but it feels like a 40k story. I would be looking to take the core idea of it, because there's nothing wrong with being inspired by 40k. It's just I'd rather not repeat the stories. And the inspiration point here being that even if he loses, he wins, and that their opponent loses. So that would suggest that this particular character, if you were doing something with that, is intelligent, sharp, and is looking to build traps to ensure that it always comes out ahead. So not necessarily the turn to dust route, but most certainly the turn the other person's plans into dust, to take a slightly more metaphorical route.
Yeah.
So I think the ideas here are great, but I would generally, whenever we start off with one of these things, is take a look at them and go, what do they mean underneath? Why is this story being presented? And could we present it in a slightly different way that ties it into the bigger Warhammer world? Because it's always nice when your characters haven't just got this unique story that came from nowhere that ends up with them being the best example of Tzeentch ever, yet not another single example of Tzeentch ever has heard of it. And you're just left going, why did no one know about Tamurkhan, given just how awesome Tamurkhan bloody was? So in that way, what you can do is effectively retrofit a character and attach it to various things or schemes or things that have to be done. So rather than, for example, taking a character like Tamurkhan, who pretty much does his own thing, you could have our Zinch brother starting off being 100% in Zinch's service. Not an individual, someone who's actually actively working towards Zinch's goals. And that would include, for example, taking out Be'lakor, which would be, I think, quite a fun way of doing it. But that is just on our first pitches. Again, Nightbringer, thank you so much. Great comment.
Yep. So finish the Saga Games Workshop. Oh, wouldn't that be a thing? That would be the true surprise of the century.
That would be awesome.
Yeah.
I do have an extra comment in that as well, and that's that through the course of this one, our previous two streams on these they've kind of got a bit bigger than we expected. Our very first stab at this was meant to be done in a night with all three brothers. That clearly didn't happen. That also being the case, I imagine that by the end of this stream, because obviously I'm starting at midnight here, by the end of this stream, and we're tired and the tears of exhaustion are slipping down our face, we may not have finished this story in its entirety. In fact, it would not surprise me with Zinch being one of the most complicated and with us having already used up a whole host of standard storylines. So we're going to be trying to think up something new to try and ground this individual character into the Warhammer world. Might take a bit longer. That being the case, we already said that we're going to be doing a fourth stream. We are going to be doing a fourth stream in this because we've got a whole host of brilliant ideas that you've been posting up on Discord, for example. We'd really like to show some of the art that you've shared, some of the ideas you've shared over there as well. But we'd also like to discuss the story as a whole, because really all we did with our first two was build up a plot line for where they may go and then kill them, pretty much, without necessarily examining the overall story. What's the story? And I think that would bring a lovely cap off to this particular set of streams, where we can take our three brothers and then tell the full story that leads to eventually the summation of what the Throne of Chaos is.
Yep. Let the throne's incumbent be ever changing. That's I like that phrasing. That's a good set of phrasing. And thank you very much for that, T-Ball. Captain Magma, Zinch Bro could try to steal Skaven brood mothers, and if you select regular Skaven to breed his own troops, he could steal these directly from a member of the Council of 13, perhaps.
Holy shit.
That's a whole lot of info.
So, I love this idea, but we used Skaven in The Last Brother, so I would prefer to avoid Skaven if we could have something else. We even had one of the sub-lieutenants, if you prefer, being a Skaven character sitting on the end of its various tentacly naughtiness. Now, we didn't use it as a primary antagonist, and Skaven are big, but again, there are lots of other factions that we haven't alighted on at all. So my first inclination is I'd prefer not to, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't.
Yeah, we'll definitely play around with it. Yeah, the idea of a chaos character that's out there like breeding their own Skaven, it's like, oh my god, this is spooky. Gideon, could the main target for the Zinch brother be the Gates of Calith? That way you can expand the colonial high elves and explore how they differ from those that inhabit Ulthuan. Yeah, that is certainly a really, really good starting point of an idea. One of the things I've definitely been thinking about heading up to this stream is that when you kind of chart out the paths that we've done for the other two brothers plus Tamurkhan's own path, there's actually not necessarily a ton of territory that is left to be like explored without running into like deeply into races we've already done. For instance, you wouldn't necessarily want to go really big into Lustria because we had a pretty heavy Lizardman theming with the Corn brother. But the High Elves are very obviously missing from the roster of races we've used so far. And one of the things that me and Andy have also been kind of kicking around is that using Grand Cathay is a viable option based on kind of how important they've become to the setting and how things are kind of going with like the old world and everything. So I will say that if you were to use the Gates of Calith and you kind of had a focus on more of the Eastern Hemisphere of the world using like Grand Cathay and the Elven colonies over there, that is not a bad idea. There's a lot to do over there.
I'm going to add my company's worth to that one as well and say, I like it. We are already not saying that later ideas are going to completely overwrite this because they may, but I think that we've definitely got a direction there, which would be Grand Cathay being potentially our primary antagonist. And the High Elves being an interesting, secondary antagonist. It may be our Zinch character is that powerful. That could make for a really interesting one. Particularly if we've got a character that perhaps falls, which would be very rare for an elf. So perhaps we've got one that has managed to convince an elf round to its way of thinking. That again begins to start speaking towards a character that's perhaps more calculating, more careful. You could also have one that is, I mean, our core theme for our previous ones has been the attempt to achieve demonhood, to ascend. We could have, again, a slightly different angle. Our first one was desperate to ascend. Our second one was driving forward to ascension. Our third one denied ascension. This one could be going down a different route on the ascension path, so to speak, in that it could be one that effectively has ascended in the material realm and has no need to go any further, because it's one of the primary agents of Tzeentch in the world as a material agent. That could be a different route as well. But again, now we're elevating this character up to a level of capability that might be perhaps surprising. There's one other thing that I would, beyond just the general, I think the stab towards colonial high elves and Cathay is really not a bad stab at all. I think that works quite well. It gives us a really nice, clean direction that doesn't hit on factions we've done previously, and we can hint at others, like have, Clan Eshin do something or something like that. That could be super fun. They provide super fun options. In fact, no, I think I've said enough of that. Let's move on, because we've got a lot to get through here. I was about to go on another screen. I realized, no, that's like another 5-minute chat. We got tons to get through.
We swing back around. Nightbringer, thank you very much again. Would be cool if the Zinch brother was something like an undead champion, while his armor shows all his old mutations, so he would have an undead themed army. I will say that I actually do like the idea of him not being living, of being something, because that is a trope that has existed in Warhammer before and has not been touched on in a super long time. Is the idea that there are chaos champions who are essentially undead, like your Valnir the Reaper from good old Nurgle days. Or, Krell is kind of in a nebulous territory with there. And Zinch definitely, is the god of magic, essentially. And with change as a concept, there's a lot of interesting stuff you could do there, especially by leaning into the idea of how can you express his mutations if, like, he doesn't have flesh anymore. So, like, one of the things that actually jumps out at me as a cool idea there is, like, if you think about if you've ever seen someone that had, if you've ever seen, like, at museums, there's, like, certain forms of, like, bone cancers and stuff, where you see the bones that are left over from people that have passed away, and they're, like, super freaky looking, where they've got, like, all these little spikes and these weird textures and stuff. could make for a really interesting idea. And then, of course, the idea that maybe his armor is like the thing that keeps him here. That could be an interesting play of like, what if you have a brother who in a way has already died, but due to some type of shenanigan, which we'll get into talking to, is still lingering in the world.
Yeah, I quite like that, particularly if we are looking to start building a story here. You have some really obvious areas in Cathay, for example, that are deeply associated with death. And you could have this brother literally pulling itself out of that. That could be an interesting way forward. A character that is perhaps killed and calcified in a particular form after falling in the good old river. That could be fun. There could be something in that could be taken into something else. So I'm not against this idea, although the very nature of the mutations that we will be showing through this will look different and perhaps will feel less Tzeentch. So we need to make sure that we kept the core of what Tzeentch is in terms of the themes that we were using to present it. And that's more than just saying, here's the rune, I've stamped it in the middle of this bone thing. We wouldn't want it to look like an undead army because it would start to cross over with classic undead or Kemrian undead or Nehecaran or vampires or whatever. We wouldn't want it to look like any of those. So that would be a core component of me if we went this direction of building that, because it'd be very easy to just pull out a zombie dragon. Awesome. Slap him a slightly second head on it and go, it's a chaos zombie dragon. Woo! But it doesn't really it doesn't really feel chaos.
Ah, yes, the Dieter Hellshit strategy.
Yeah, totally. We want to do something that's a little bit better than we've run out of ideas and we've just slapped a Tzeentch symbol on it.
Yeah, but yeah, I do think there is something there. And we'll see what kind of other comments and stuff come up. Ricky Chapman, first mutation, having living crystal in some form represented on their body is a really cool idea, with it being a bunch of geomantic crystals making up his body instead of just normal flesh and stuff. I will say, I do really like the theme that a lot of y'all are sticking to, of the idea that he's not flesh and bone, that there's something else going on here. That could also make for a interesting mutation play.
Yeah, it could make it super fun to paint as well, and that's something you want to consider. Crystal is super fun to paint because it's pretty easy to paint. It tends to be one color highlighted up to sharp whites. It looks really snazzy. You can do lots of different colors for each one of the crystals. That would be pretty awesome. And for those painters who are really, really good, they then start giving you the idea that it's got depth and extra vibrance and lovely. So yeah, that could work really well, particularly when you've got in the Warhammer world the idea that most magic can be crystallized into its purest form, which is a crystal of each one of the colors. So now we've got the potential of turning him into some sort of mandala of crystal, with 8 shards of crystal pouring out each one a different color up to the white one at the top, and then swirling into this great black crystal that sits in its chest that it can use to unleash something truly horrific, with bones strapping up and holding it into place. There's something beginning to build there, perhaps.
Yeah, I was going to say that could actually play really well with that undead concept as well, of like all of his flesh is gone and he's essentially a corpse, but all of his essence is bound in these crystals instead, and his armor. That would make for a pretty kick-ass mini, I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah,
thank you very much. Happy bees with teeth. God, guys. Earlier today, people have been obsessed with, they're like, oh, we need a new concept to lose our shit over. We want bees with teeth in Warhammer. It's like,
I think there already is bees with teeth. I think you're a bit late there, Biofoot. I seem to remember adding something about that. Or did we keep that? We went with the... no, you had the butterflies that drank tears.
Oh, the sorrow swarms.
Yeah. Oh, gosh, no, there was another one as well. I can't remember. I was in a book that I was working on once. But it was so long ago now that my old brain refuses to fetch it.
But thank you. But,
yes, thanks.
Nightbringer. Again, good Lord, Nightbringer. Please make sure you're taking care of yourself.
Oh, Nightbringer, thank you.
What if the path started in the marshes of madness, fighting with the vampire counts, and then they forged their way across to Grand Cathay with a final fight at the Forge of Souls? Wow, okay, there's a big old turn there. I will say that a Badlands start is not impossible by any means. It would be very difficult. Yeah, it would be really difficult to avoid Tamurkhan's route.
Yeah, my issue there is exactly the same. We would be getting very, very close to Tamurkhan territory, And to avoid Tamurkhan territory, we'll start some mental gymnastics and some weird stories that we bring into place purely to avoid the obvious, sensible route. And I don't like doing that if we've got a better option. There's a huge difference between, say, for example, dropping in the south of Cathay, having him have some terrible thing happen as he falls into a river, making his way up, doing something else.
As you're saying that, an idea popped into my head that's a little bit crackpot.
I love the crackpot idea.
So, what if we really, if in this hypothetical creation scenario, if we wanted to just piss off Games Workshop, what we could do is, what if we ran with the idea that, according to the novel based on Dreadfleet, the winner of the Dreadfleet storyline is Zinch, with the Golden Magus taking over the Galleon's graveyard and transforming the Tzeentch and stuff. And if we combine that with our stream that we did about where the Galleon's graveyard likely is, being way down there in the southwest, you could theoretically have a Zinch brother emerge from the Galleon's graveyard to then attack the gates of Calith, to hits that part of the High Elf colonies, fights their way across the High Elf colonies to get on to pass the High Elves, and then goes on to invade Cathay. Could be an interesting route.
Okay, so we've got ourselves, I think, a couple of potentially interesting things there. Do we have a good potential story of dragging ourselves out of the Galleon's graveyard? Point the first. And
if he's undead,
hell yeah. Hell yeah. Particularly because everything that dies makes its way there that falls in the sea. So that means that we've got ourselves potentially a really cool story of the brother that dies before he achieves his capabilities, before he achieves his full, let's say, prophesized end. He doesn't. He falls in battle at sea. And I think that could be quite fun. And then having him drag his poor, sorry corpse ass out of the Galleon's graveyard, equally cool. And then making our way over towards the High Elves and Cathay, and that's where we hit our major stumbling block. It is, I think, in essence, as a direction, great. But the big question then is, why? What's the story? Morning Glory.
Well, figure that out. So,
and I think that's something for everyone to consider as you're dropping in your comments. If we do take that route, why are we bursting through High Elf lands and into Cathay? What is it that it's looking for? If, for example, we go with the crystal idea, so we've got ourselves this crystalline mutation that's working through it and channeling the winds of magic, is it looking to then somehow merge with or perhaps ascend upon the great compass, the wishing compass? Sitting in the heart of Cathay. Is that what it's going for? Effectively becoming its own version of the compass. That would be one route towards its potential. That's a great city that it sits over, after all. We could effectively go full circle and go back to the core initial prophecy of the great city that will eventually allow the Throne of Chaos to ascend upon. That would be great. It would be a nice way of tying it back in. And we've got the brother who is dead, so that means the others are quite safe in the knowledge that that one can never achieve it. But came back the very next day out of the good old Galleon's graveyard, and that's just brilliant.
Waddles out, yeah.
The very next day, Zinch came back. You thought he was a goner.
Firesnake 905 says, I like the idea of a giant eldritch-like jellyfish that floats for the mount, capable of raining magical lightning. We'll say instead of warp lightning.
I mean, even warp lightning is fine because the word warp is used. We got warpstone after all. You know, it's not a word. It's a word that Games Workshop doesn't want people to use because the warp for Games Workshop is now 40k.
I would say that could definitely work as an idea. I mean, I don't hate that. I'm a little nervous around leaning too heavily into nautical themes because with the Core Brother, we went very nautical.
Very heavily on it.
But yeah, I will acknowledge that.
I mean, if you were looking for bringing in something nautical, I might actually be more interested in doing something like bringing in something a touch Arabian. Giving the idea that what happens down in the Galleon's graveyard involves, I can't remember the name of the chap who
the Golden Magus.
Yeah, he's got a name.
Does he?
He doesn't. I thought his name was El something or another. Doesn't even matter. I can't remember what it is. Yes, the Golden Magus. So he could have been semi-responsible for bringing him back. He might come along as an actual ally, so we could get ourselves a tabletop version of him, which would be super cool. And that means that we can get ourselves some crazy djinn rules, as it summons up some djinns as they arrive.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay, so that could be super cool. But I agree that the idea of bringing in a jellyfish is getting super close to our sharks and similar, our big, huge, legged versions.
If we had not already done the corn thing, I would
I
have
really
said
like the idea part. Yeah, absolutely. But that doesn't mean that we can't lean into something similar as we're making our way along. It doesn't need to be a jellyfish. It could be something a little bit like the creature out of Nope. If any of you have seen Nope out there. Something a little bit weird and something a bit alien and something a bit strange. But again, you don't want to go too deep into that without... I mean, you don't want to move into Age of Sigmar territory too heavily. You want it to feel Warhammery, and that tends to mean something a bit more mount-like.
I will say I would like for it to be a flying mount, because we don't have a flying mount.
I agree. I'm cool with it being a flying mount.
And that matches well to Zinchian themes.
It does.
Gideon also suggested psychology. Body is made of living, shifting crystal physiology. God, yeah. Can you tell I'm tired? Body
here to help.
Shifting crystals, reflecting the crystal labyrinth, and with a bird/spider monster mount, as the black pit is in Zinch's realm on the Chaos Realms map. That's an interesting concept. I will say, I really like that everyone's leaning into the crystal concept. I think,
and as stupid as this may say, Gideon, I hadn't even thought of the crystal labyrinth yet, and I kind of feel like it.
Neither have I. He said that, I was like, oh yeah, that obviously makes sense.
That's great, particularly if we've got somebody here who appears to be in some sort of spiritual quest that's attempting to make the most of the mutations that it has, because these are gifts from Tzeentch directly. So we've got ourselves a real believer here. That at least what it appears to be the case.
Yeah,
these crystal growths are coming out of it. These are blessings, and understanding these blessings and what they mean and how they can best be represented into the real world as physical benefits for Tzeentch and this particular brother is much the quest of its life. So I think a visit to the Crystal Labyrinth, communing with the various scholars that are there, proving itself there at some point, all makes sense. I'm not sure I quite see the spider monster connection that's hard here. After all, it's just because a thing is on a thing beside a thing doesn't mean you should necessarily make it that person's. We really only do that if it thematically ties in well. And we have an obvious link here with the potential for the Crystal Labyrinth, but we don't necessarily have a link there for the Black Pit. So if you're doing that, you'd really want it to make sense.
I agree very much with that. I will say though, I tripling down on the Crystal Labyrinth thing of, I really like the idea that one of his big mutations being that he literally has pieces of Zinch's Crystal Labyrinth that when he was alive were like growing out of his body, which would have looked absolutely horrific. And granted, if we're going with kind of that undead theme, would look really fucking cool on a more skeletal, armored skeleton that's got these crystal shards growing out of him, and something like some of them are like floating around him, connected by little like pieces of magic and lightning and stuff.
That means you can get yourself all these like big.
Because the actual mini that would work really well, and it would look really cool.
Yeah, particularly for the one that's on foot as well. Particularly if it's flying in the center of it, and it's like a great mandala around it, and with the chunks sticking out in different directions. And we can dial down hard on the 9s as well. So we've got the 8 points of chaos with the central point in the middle. That's our 9th part. So we've got our strong 9 number running all the way through it. It might be nice to actually dial into the 9s a little bit throughout the course of this one, because we weren't using the sacred number too heavily in the previous one. And it might be nice to do that a little bit here. Rabble Rouser.
He's the Zinch brother. Oh my God, they figured it out.
I think we've all established I'm almost certainly the Nurgle one, given how often I get ill.
I don't know. I think they have a if you're a patron on the LAWhammer Patreon, which you should be, go check that out. You can support them. You can get access to a lot of behind the scenes posts, and when you read those posts, you go, "Oh, so Andy just is Zinch. I see now."
That's a point. I've got another one written. I should get that posted up soon.
Oh, that would be very exciting. Hammond, make the bro French because they think they know. Hammond, you gotta get over your hatred of the French. Speaking
as someone who's Scottish, I think you'll find we know more than anyone else. So, I'm happy to replace the French with that one. The French were our old alliance, after all, the old alliance the Scots had with the French.
Yeah. Plus, we used our Bretonians very heavily in the Slanesh
We
Brothers.
did. So, Bretonia, get thee hence.
Yep. Salt Editor, a book burner character rather than a knowledge gatherer, like a witch hunter, but for Zinch. I think that's a interesting idea for a individual. I don't know if that necessarily fits with the story being told through like the Thrones of Chaos saga, but there might be something there.
Okay, so what we're looking for is building a relatively neat character, and I think, Sal, you're attempting to do exactly that. You're attempting to look at what is the standard for Tzeentch and what can you do to take a different route but still feel really, really Tzeentch. And there are multiple characters that are gathering knowledge on behalf of Tzeentch, ranging from demons to champions to, I mean, it's the classic sorcerer trope after all. But if we're building someone who's attempting to turn into, inhabit, and become, then he is the living book. And the only one that matters. He is the one that speaks the truth of Tzeentch. He's much more like an oracle and a seer and a talking point, rather than the other one, which was worshipped that we had previously. So you could argue it's not so much a book burner per se, but most certainly someone whose inner psychology might be, my way is the proper way. It could be, as we said potentially earlier, a true believer. And that would come potentially hand in hand with the idea that the other Tzeentch cults are wrong and their beliefs need to be purged. So you could add that, but my general concern would be, why? What are we doing with this? What's it being added for? And we could tie that through to building a cult around it, but we'd have to be careful we didn't end up falling into that shrine area that we built for this. A
part of me kind of thinks there could be something in having a character that actively destroys knowledge for some greater purpose,
or absorbs it,
or takes it into themselves. Therefore, like removing it from the world, removing it from the stage, which could do like as a very nice explanation for why he would hit the High Elf colonies in particular really hard, not only because they'd be in his way, but because the High Elves would be protecting a lot of really important key tidbits of knowledge in some of those like various
knowledge and more the magic trapped in the artifacts and similar. After all, knowledge is nothing. Knowledge is ephemera. It exists even if you destroy one example of it. It will continue on. Ideas are eternal, as they say.
I mean, what if you run with the idea of that he can make knowledge go if he like takes it into himself?
Why? How? What's the mechanism? What are we doing with it?
Yeah, no,
we have an answer on that. I wasn't dissing it. I was saying love it.
Yeah.
But why and how? What's the character here? If we've got somebody who is building up towards some culminating ascension of some sort, then having a mechanism for him doing that is great, whether that's absorbing knowledge, absorbing magic, absorbing artifacts. But if we're looking for him to go through the High Elves, then what they have in great reads is both magical users and high-end magic items. So that would be a good stepping stone. But also, if we're looking for lore, they have a chunk of it. But you tend to find that most High Elf lore is, if you look for the repository of it's back in Hoeth. Not in Hoeth, I mean the Tower of Hoeth, in Safri. So it might not be the best stereotype to pursue, the absorption of knowledge, but the absorption of magical artifacts and then them causing the crystals to grow within him, that works relatively well. And the elves will be definitely against that, particularly if they themselves, if it's soul stuff as well that helps him do that, as the souls that he's taking in from the elves help him grow and become more powerful. That could also be.
I could even see it as because of what he is now, like he almost kind of has to take it in to keep sustaining himself.
It is because he's dead. Yeah.
Which that could actually make for like a really powerful scene of like him going after essentially like a powerful set of like waystone shards or various aspects of things the elves protect very heavily for a lot of reasons, and him just like essentially want to eat all this stuff. Richard Gurnison, what about someone if someone that he loved was trapped in a mirror, so he's obsessed with scrying and reflections, perhaps give a shattered theme? I will say, if you wanted to go with the idea of a shattered mirror, shattered crystal, I will say that if you wanted to make the character a little more empathetic or add a little more flavor, a little more spice, the idea that he stares at some of the crystals to see reflections of a past or to see things that he no longer can reach is interesting. It's difficult to tie into the narrative without it just weighing it down. But I could see an interesting personality trait there of someone that is filled with longing, which would make him quite different from his other three brothers. But it's tricky.
That's I mean, I can see longing being used for all three of them in different ways.
True.
Yeah,
almost more of like a nostalgia, I guess, would be the other way to put it.
but we have a touch of that with Slaanesh, but only a touch. So Gotrek, I have mirrors have been used with both Slaanesh and Tzeentch multiple times. So I am naturally slightly antagonistic to using them in general because they are a classic, and I do mean classic source in the true meaning of the word, for a reflection into the other world. And they are often used in many old stories to represent the weak point between stepping between one place into the next. And that has been used again and again by various Warhammer writers who have just looked into real world mythology and just copy pasted down. Meaning that this is, whilst a super fun one for the core story behind a character that we would like to feel entirely unique, I'm not necessarily convinced. Now I'm going to undermine that by saying the ideas of reflections and scrying along with the crystals work really well. That worked really well. The two of them seem fundamentally linked. So for all I have those natural immediate, I'm not sure that's a great idea, I will now say, but it could turn into a great idea if we developed it, thought it out a little bit further, and perhaps landed in something cool. Something cool could be, for example, that our Zinch person is cursed to give prophecy but not understand, or to alternatively not so much understand but to actually be able to see itself. So the only way that others gain prophecy through looking its reflected through its reflected crystals. There's lots of things you could do with that, but that sounds more mythic. And also, where's these curses coming from? How does this come into place? So we could build this shit up, but I'm not sure it's building up something unique and interesting on top of what we already have.
I will say that I do like the idea that, like, especially if he has like certain crystals from the labyrinth floating around him, that he sees something in those, in the like the reflections from those crystals. But the question would be, what is it that he's seeing, and why is he seeing it? Like, how does the crystal labyrinth and what it does to mortals play into what he perceives? Which is a difficult question to answer. But
I'm going to say one last thing as well that I think is possibly worth saying on the previous comment, and that's that Games Workshop often uses sex as perversion, which is an unfortunate outcome, and relationships often fall into that. So whenever we're dealing with chaos, you tend to find that it's left to Slaanesh to deal with, and it gets painted pretty badly. So having ourselves some form of great love could be fun, but given the nature of the characters we're building, which are effectively immortal, ancient champions of chaos that are heavily mutated, it would have to be a damn clever story to make it work well for Zinch. And in no way do I mean that we thus shouldn't use it. I just mean we have to be damn clever if we're going to use that.
Yeah. Huh. I almost wonder, like, I wonder if you could play around with the idea of that he did have a lover and he did something potentially stupid, like trapping them in the labyrinth so that they're functionally immortal as well, almost in a possessive way.
And if you're doing it with Zinch, it's almost better running on betrayal, isn't it? So the classic, Thanos situation: throw the thing you love away to gain access to what you actually want, and then it's literally haunting all the crystals around them. In fact, that could be a fun thing.
Yeah,
I mean, he could literally be haunted.
I like that.
Inside the crystals that he has.
Yeah, so like if each of the crystals is like someone that he cared for, that he betrayed to go to be a good Zinch boy, that's cool. Actually,
Okay, and you know what that sounds like? a great betrayer. Now,
Yeah.
I'm not saying that necessarily ties through into the first Tamurkhan, but perhaps we've got ourselves the true form of some sort of betrayer building here. So that's another potential route that we could take as we're making our way through this rather rugged terrain of ideas that we're building through.
Yeah, I do like what I'm kind of peering at over the horizon. That's actually really cool.
I quite like the just to make sure that idea is very clearly stated. So if anyone wants to run with it and take it in a different direction, this is loosely what we're looking at. The way that he gets access to these great crystals is that he has to get someone to willingly do something on his behalf, which means he has to convince them, not use magic, not do something else, which means that he has potentially fallen in love, gained followers who trust him, had someone who's particularly loyal, and in each case, each one of those betrayals brought one of those crystals, pardon me as I bash my mic, brought one of those crystals underneath his power, granting him much more power in return, but those spirits continue on within there, filled with loathing and hatred at both what they've become and at the creature that they now must aid. And that whole betrayal theme runs quite closely to what Be'lakor is as well, which we do intend to weave in at some point. So I think there's definitely something in there that you could run with.
Yeah, I like that, especially because you could have like a really cool scene in the book where like it's a little more of a focus scene where he's talking to the crystals and like no one else hears responses, but you just have him having like this weird one-sided dialogue where the reader's kind of having to imply what he thinks he's hearing the crystal say back to him, which could be really fun.
Yeah,
Ricky Chapman, for a mount, why not a flying monolith pulled by either demons or ghosts pulling across the sky like an evil wizard Santa?
Right, so my earlier comment on not wanting to create an Age of Sigmar model, I think applies here, because that sounds like a cool fucking model, but it sounds like Age of Sigmar. Warhammer has a slightly different, more oldie worldy tone in generally how it presents stuff. Not always, but generally. And I would rather we were building something that when Games Workshop looked at it, because we're half presuming we're doing it this officially, even though we're doing it about as unofficially as you can possibly imagine, they would go, yeah, that's fine. This doesn't challenge Age of Sigmar's IP at all. It doesn't look anything like an Age of Sigmar thing. This looks Warhammer old world, so to speak. This feels like Warhammer. And that is a fucking cool idea, evil wizard Santa, that feels like an Age of Sigmar model just gagging to be built.
Yeah, I'm really trying hard to have there be some kind of creature as the mount, as opposed to just like a flying structure. I mean, we could go with the structure option; it would be different, but I think for him to really feel like he matches with the Throne of Chaos theme for the big bads, I really want it to be a creature if we can somehow make that work. Inquisitor Thomas, perhaps a Zinch character who's all about actively concealing his existence, like a shadow caster who wants to be the ultimate unknown puppeteer. I will say that leans a little close to how I kind of view, like, you could argue like the Changeling or Egrim von Horseman. Who are both, too. Yeah, and Be'lakor. Those are
There's a lot of this in Tzeentch already, so I think I'd rather go in a different direction for all I love it, Inquisitor Thomas.
Yeah, that being said, if you're running with the idea that this character is deeply tied into the Sire of the Faithless, either as they are the same person in different guises, or they're very deeply related in some way, the idea that he does use shadowy tactics, and he even creates like the weird shadow assassin thing that we see try to kill Tamurkhan, would absolutely make sense.
Perhaps that shadow assassin was nothing more than the ghost that sits inside the shadow.
That's what I was gonna say. Like, if he like pulls one of his crystals and he's able to create a shadowy avatar of them.
Like that.
Yeah. Jack Reaver, maybe TB Zinch's brother corrupts the interpretation of the Great Plan, perhaps tricking Lizardman towards being aggressive to stay. The Xinyang's plan with Yuan Bo being a trick of Xianxi, a twin manipulation. There's a really fun story that you could tell there, but I really don't want to use the Lizardmen unless we absolutely have to, because we use them very heavily in the Corn Brother.
We did, and we were awesome too.
Yeah, which was great, and I'm really happy with that storyline, and I liked a unique having Corn being the one that's messing with a Great Plan for once, which is very, very different from the usual. So I do like this, don't get me wrong, but I don't think this is the story. This is the story for that tale. so to speak.
Yeah, I think broadly speaking, Jack, I agree. I love the idea, but it draws relatively close to what we did with Korn, and we're trying to be quite unique with each of them and ensure that the antagonists are different each time.
Nightbringer 325. In his attempts to avoid the prophecy, he sees the way to beat Be'lakor by following the prophecy. That's double back. I defy the prophecy by following the prophecy until the final moment where he rebinds the curse of Be'lakor. You know, something that was kind of interesting when Andy was talking about how this could tie in with Be'lakor, of that you could play around with, is he going up against Be'lakor and having a shenanigan with Bellacor's binding in like the modern age, or do you want to have some weird time bullshit shenanigans where it ties into Bellacor's original binding?
You not entirely sure you need to do that much in the way of time bullshit shenanigans, because that could just be part of the historic tale that leads up to the modern tale, so that Be'lakor and our brother here have just got a very long history.
Okay, that's also a really that's a really interesting way to play it too.
And ultimately this brother probably dies possibly in Cathay, as it's attempting to invade Cathay at some point or another, falls into the river, gets sucked away, it all goes very wrong. Who knows, there could be something you can build in there, comes back as an undead crystal thing at some later point when the Galleon's graveyard is brought underneath the sway of Zinch. There's definitely a potential story in there that allows have a long history. Oh, I didn't want him to talk either, because, you know, hey, whatever his idea was, meh. So as we wait for Sotek to return, assuming that his internet's not just died and I'm going to be left abandoned here for a while. Ah, there he goes. He's back.
He was like, fuck you, get out of here. Okay.
So you were saying I really...
Yeah, what I was going to say is I really, really like, and I think it works really well thematically, of the idea that he was either crossing or falls into the Dragon River. And like the typical thing of most people try and cross it, or they touch or whatever, and their souls literally get ripped out of them. But he's able to persevere by the crystals hanging on to him, but it still kills him. And then his body's washed out to sea.
Yeah.
And is claimed by the Galleon's graveyard. I think that works so well.
Yeah, it gives us a really fun story as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, because then you have the whole thing of like, what was he doing there, and all this other stuff. Yep. Interesting.
Yep. Okay, cool. What's next?
Thank you again.
So far, guys, you rock. This is the one that I had literally least thought on, because I didn't want to prejudge, because Tzeentch has got so much possibility. I was much more interested to see what was going to get thrown out there. I've also read the various comments that have been dropped down over in Discord, and some of them are just...
Ricky Chapman. Also, how about he wants to turn Be'lakor into the throne? And he will use Warpstone and Skaven Blight as catalyst for it. So probably not going to end up using Skaven. If anything, if we wanted to lean really heavy into Skaven stuff, I would probably be more inclined to go back to the Slaanesh brother story and just tweak it a little bit to have more Skaven involvement.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah, but
I was thinking about that after the stream.
Yeah, your comment that Be'lakor himself is the throne is something that is very interesting. We're probably not going to focus too much on that for this particular stream. One thing me and Andy talked a little bit about before the stream is that I think for next week we want to build the overall narrative, because we'll have all of our brothers established and like the various routes they take. So building the overall big narrative and then talking about what the throne actually is. But I will say, hold on to that idea, because you say that, and granted, that could be something that's explored through the Zinch brothers story of him. Man, the idea that Be'lakor might be the throne is actually a super interesting concept.
I think there's definitely a way of putting it, particularly when you consider what Be'lakor means, what Be'lakor is for the overall story of chaos as well in the world. It's just, I think, really quite nice when you see his place. It's also worth noting
what you're putting down, Chapman.
Yeah, I love it. And for all we sort of diss the inclusion of Skaven here, I see absolutely no reason that we couldn't have Clan Eshin, since we're over in the east, making some sort of attacking, stabbing foray either into the Force or something similar. So as an antagonist rather than perhaps as a potential ally, in the same way that the Orcs and Goblins were used in the Tamurkhan's tale halfway through to do a couple of
I agree,
before they arrive in the Empire. But I wouldn't like them to be a primary focus, because we already have a Skaven character popping up with our third brother.
Yep. Awesome Lion Soares. Nothing to add. Just wanted to ask if you've seen the new Tzeentch. Not yet, but I will be taking a look at that tonight. I heard a lot of the characters have new intro movies, which is really cool. That's always very exciting to hear. Captain Magma, could we canonize the Tome of Fate / Sartorial into this in some fashion? It could be a really good opportunity. Maybe make the advisor a canon character that the bro utilizes. You could absolutely do that. And I think we have kicked around some ideas in some prior streams that also kind of lean into that as a potential. It's doable. It'd be hard. It's doable. You all right?
I'm not against it as an idea. As anyone who's watched my streams will know, I'm not against using the advisor as an NPC for a bit of fun. But if we are building a tale where the second brother is responsible for allowing Urson to be captured, and the third brother is going to be somehow interacting with Be'lakor, then we are potentially interrupting the official, effectively canonical end, which is the advisor is with Kislev, and helping Kislev win, because Kislev wins that particular one. And what we want to do is reinforce that rather than undermine it. So perhaps we could have ourselves an earlier part where the advisor moves from there to Kislev, having learned something important, perhaps having learned about Urson or something similar. But if we're doing this, I would much rather, I think, given the tales that we have, potentially have the advisor move from the Batonian, the Slaanesh brother, over to Kislev after those events.
I think he'd be better as a more of a cameo appearance in the Slaanesh storyline. Yeah,
it does seem to be
I agree.
Fit.
It would be really fun to have him show up.
But it would be cool. It would be super cool if we could find a good way to bring it in here too. But I think that if I was sitting down, having basically doing the concepting as we've done in our previous streams and this stream, once we've got the concepting, you sit down and go, right, how do we build this into a proper full story with a really solid beginning, middle, and end, with lots of fun twists and turns that make people go, ooh, and potentially, and oh, look at that character, because who doesn't love an Easter egg? As it stands, the obvious place to put him would be in the Slaanesh part because of the strong ties to Urson. And it would allow us to then move that character over to Kislev, perhaps even have a betrayal where effectively the scenes that we see from Total War 3 of the advisor arriving is him having left from a far, far worse court. So, yeah, there's definitely something that you could do with that there. Here, we would have to strongly twist it to make it make sense.
Maybe we could use the Naga of Koresh as an ally since they're close by, and the little we know about them is their use of blood magic. I would say the Naga would be too big. Like that's too big of a thing, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I would.
As we said, we are 100% staying away from anything that's not been used in Warhammer already, and this has not been used in Warhammer already.
What I will say, if you're like, I really want to have like a new ally faction, that is like something that is based on what we already have, but adds a fun flair to it. I think what you could get away with is using the Jade-blooded vampires.
I'd be against that too. They've never been in Warhammer. And we set ourselves up some good rules at the beginning. You end up diving into having to create stuff up from the beginning. And they have never been in Warhammer. Where the Chaos Dwarves were in Warhammer. And the Gnome factions were in Warhammer. And we built our original rules that we were doing the Forge World job, which was investigating parts of the existing Warhammer world that the main game said was there and sort of flirted with using, but never actually used. The Chaos Dwarves had tons of material across multiple editions, but were just left kind of stranded in 8. Nuln has long been a core component of the Empire army, but never had an army list, where other places like, say, Middenheim had. So what we're looking at here is trying to add to the existing Warhammer world rather than create new sections.
Yeah, I mean, we could.
I love it, and I would be well for it. But if we stick by our rules, yeah, probably not.
We probably could use. I mean, if you're kind of leaning into the Galleon's Graveyard aspect, could use the Vampire Coast. Take their like White Dwarf thing and expand them, and have like a new Vampire Coast S faction. So that could be a way to do it, or you could just lean really heavy into Hyos and Cathay as well.
Yeah,
And just have it be two antagonists.
There's quite a lot of material that was dropped in, for example, just for Dreadfleet, for example, which was very much it wasn't a core game, but it's a produced game. We've got loads of cool stuff for it. It's something that is said to be in the Warhammer world and is out there, and we can definitely lean upon. So that works relatively well. Where this one, for every part of my essence goes, fucking cool, yeah, let's do that. We're trying to be strict, because if we're not strict,
I do agree.
It just spirals out of control.
Let's see. Darius Rose. Hi, guys. Perhaps a character who believes his destiny for the Throne of Chaos is set in stone. His mutation is that he is covered in eyes, like Zomari from Bleach. Each eye can manipulate the fate of others, but is blind to his own. I love that as an idea, but that is really close to certain aspects involving Kairos Fate Weaver, where you have a character that can see the future and the past, but he's blind to the present.
I'm actually going to very lightly disagree, while simultaneously saying literally everything that Sotek said.
I'm curious how light this light will be.
Okay, but it's a slight one here, because I like some of the words here. And I think it's worth just looking at those words and saying, how can we use them? First one, we've got ourselves, at least intent so far, a Chaos Champion of Zinch, who is riddled through with crystal, who has great crystals floating around it from the labyrinth. And how can we not use set in stone? I mean, how can we not use destiny set in stone? His destiny set in his stones. There is an obvious story to be told there, and I really like it. So thank you so much for making that comment, because it freaking rocks. And then as we move on, his mutation is that he's covered in stones rather than eyes. Like, it doesn't really matter about Bleach. Each of the stones can manipulate the fate of others, but he's blind to his own. And there we have ourselves some form of sound. Everything is set in stone, yet he can't quite interpret the stones himself, because each of the stones, possessed as they are whispering lies into his ears, and he's attempting to get away from the around him. And there's definitely potentially something in that.
Yeah, okay. I will say the idea that it's not so much that like he can't see it, as everything that's being told to him is actively encased in lies because it's coming from these spirits. That I really like, because then you have a character who's trying really hard to suss out. Like, he knows there's a grain of truth in everything they say.
He knows that one of the things they say is true, but it's the other 8 things that are said that are lies. And which one of the 8? You could have yourself a really lovely set of canticles and prophecies that are backed in 9 lines, and each one of those 9 lines are 8 falsehoods and 1 truth. And they come from the whispering spirits in his crystals. And he can never know which one is certainly the truth, although he's bloody well trying to figure that out. And then we've got ourselves a ton of really cool prophecies that you can drop throughout the course of the book. And the reader themselves can read through each one and going, okay, which one's the truth? And then possibly some of them come true. And then through the course of the book, what we could have is him pinning down, that's the true one in this one, which means I know that that stone is lying elsewhere. And it slowly but surely pulls together what its fate is and ultimately makes some form of mistake.
Yeah, I super love that. I love that a lot. That, I think that's fucking genius, because that would also be so fun for, like Andy said, for as a reader, it would be so fun to go back through the story and see which all the truths happens. I will say I also like the idea of I think one of the things you could do for the model because one of the things that would be tricky about him being kind of like undead and being mostly just like bone and crystal would be like indicating a lot of mutations without having like fleshy nonsense everywhere. And one of the things you could do that actually would be fun would be that in places where his bone is exposed, like where he's got gaps in his armor, like his face and stuff like that, you have like with a skeleton, you know, you have the whole concept of the eye holes, but him having like eye holes all over where he used to have eyes, and like he does have eyes through the crystals, but having these fun gaps where you can kind of tell where he used to have some nasty fleshy mutations, but all that's left are like holes in the bones that were made for those eyes. I think that's a good mutation to run with that can be represented on a bone boy, so to speak.
And then once you combine that with the chaos armor that he will inevitably be wearing on top as well, so we can get ourselves some lovely different types of texture onto that model. We've got ourselves something that's really building into a relatively unique figure, that once we add ourselves some more of the classic Zinch iconography in terms of the shapes will turn into something that's got a lovely, unique look. We are, however, possibly moving away from him having a steed ever, because it feels a little bit like he should be floating like he's
So
shit, an Age of Sigmar model.
I did see a comment down. I don't know where it is as far as where we are yet, but I did see a comment someone suggested for a mount that I really like, but we're not there yet. John Schultz, you can include Nippon with the Colonial High Elves if you're going the ancient route, and maybe touch on Inner Koresh. Once again, we probably want to stay away. You could have like a fun little cameo type thing where it's like, oh, there's this Nipponese fleet that's in the area, and if you want to represent them, you could use rules for like this other faction, kind of like they did with Cathay back in the Tamurkhan book. You could do something like that.
That's fine.
But that's as far as I would go with it. I wouldn't go any further.
I agree completely, and I'd agree with that being the extent of its use as well. So, for example, if we have Tamurkhan's brother having a good old wander up near Nippon somewhere and eventually arriving at somewhere else, there is literally no reason why we wouldn't want to include them, particularly given that the Nipponese fleets are described as being some of the most powerful in the world. So representing that as a distant Nippon is there casting its influence over the book, and if you want to mess around with that, you can do so in the same way that Cathay was used inside Tamurkhan. I'm totally cool with that. But I think we want to deeply and obviously avoid trying to detail or move into that area.
The idea, make his flesh translucent. That would be super fun, but for a mini, it just doesn't work.
Yeah. And also, what flesh? Where we are dealing with a dead dude, where the flesh has probably all been stripped off through the process of its death, and all of its bits have been pulled back together by the sorceries of an Arabian down in the Galleon's graveyard, where literally everything washes up. I'm quite happy for there to be very little to no flesh at all.
Yeah, I agree. That being said, translucent flesh is a super cool mutation used in your games.
Really
super gross. Cameo, not sure how feasible this idea is, but I had pictured a chaos corrupted Shukugan lord, but I'm not even sure they can succumb to corruption. I would bet you they can. And definitely. That could be a character that appears in the story of that when you're dealing with
that's a good idea, Cameo.
Yeah,
particularly if we're looking at building a section of Cathay, so maybe just one small section for an assault invasion or some other nonsense. Really, because that nicely ties together some of the streams we've had previously, where we can have our Galleon's graveyard or Weijin being used as our primary focus point for a final battle. I think that's really nice. By the way, go watch our Lorebeard's chat streams. Advert, ding, ding, ding. But that all aside, if we are giving ourselves the Shukugan lords over on the Cathayan side, I see no reason why we wouldn't want to draw one of them over that is corrupt and perhaps is responsible for opening gates or doing something else that allows the final stories and their attempt to take over the compass, if assuming that we go with that story, but it is a pretty cool one. Who doesn't want to go to the very heart of everything that is Cathay? And the enormous amount of magic being channeled by that thing is not just something of interest to Zinch, it's like way up there on the ding, ding, ding scale. So I think that's a good idea,
Yeah, I agree very heavily, and that would do well for also like reinforcing older Cathay lore about like how Zinch is like the primary chaos god that's got a lot of really powerful cults, the cults of Xianxi within Cathay. That you show that representation that Cathay does have corruption, it does have chaos cults, which would be good to see. All that stuff is good to see.
Agreed.
Dr. Bloody,
I'll show up.
Oh, no. You could go for a Darwin X-Men style character whose mutation that he adapts to resist what is thrown at him. That's a very classic trope, and definitely something you could explore. I don't think it necessarily works for this character.
Nice idea, Dr. Bloody, but my request would be, if you want that to work, is why? What's the core reason for it? What's the story behind this? Why have we got ourselves this great absorption ability within either this or one of the supplementary supernumerary characters that sits to the side of our Chaos Lord? What is the story that lies behind that reinforces the overall...
Did you just say supernumerate?
Yeah, supernumerary.
Supernumerary. I was like, what?
I didn't say supernumerary. A character to the side. So what you're looking for there is a strong reason for why, because we have very few core characters that we're going to be using. So we want each one of them to, in many respects, epitomize or perhaps anthropomorphize, if indeed such a term works for what is potentially a gribbly mutant, a particular issue that our Chaos Lord either faces, must get past, must be supported to ensure that they can get past. So perhaps someone who covers one of his flaws, someone else who is effectively the flaw, because they're coming along. What do each one of these do? And I do quite like the idea of flaws being a core component of the storytelling we're doing here, because it's a core component of crystals as a whole. The idea that certain crystals are flawed, and each one of the crystals that he has are flawed, and they're flawed by the very process of their creation, in that he could only get them through the great betrayal, but that great betrayal casts a flaw into the very heart of that crystal as the spirit twists and twirls on the inside, and in many respects weakens the extraordinary power that they bring, which is a classic piece of magic nonsense that I think works quite well. But I think flaws for each of our characters that are around, that thematically is strong, where this one is he can adapt to and absorb stuff. Why? I gave an example of how you could build a theme. Flaws, you need to turn that into the theme.
Yeah, I will say, the Darwin, or if you're dealing with DC, like Doomsday type character, we have a character that like gets builds up immunities to things that they take damage from and stuff like that. Definitely could work. I feel like that's actually appropriate as a Zinchian theme. And one thing that I don't think anyone in the chat has really started touching on yet, I know me and Andy, I think, are so up working about other things, is that you also be thinking about like what kind of faction this guy is leading. Of like how we talked about with like the Corn Brother, like a lot of really strong nautical themes and like weird monsters and like types of berserkers that he's like worked on and stuff. With the Tzeentch Brother, we talked about like how they're very cultist heavy and got some like Bretonian themes. And it's very like people corrupted spiritually. And then with Tamurkhan, obviously you had all his units. So like think about what kind of things the Tzeentch Brother will be in his little faction that adds to the Tzeentch roster as well. So like this could be like an interesting idea for a lieutenant, but like I agree very much with Andy, is you have to find a way to include, how does it relate to him with a twist? Like you have to have a twist in there, because otherwise it's just like good. Nightbringer, if we go to Grand Cathay, we could have his mount being a corrupted terracotta sentinel made similar to the hero from Total War Warhammer 3 to have a flying Gundam. I feel like that would
potentially look shit.
It would be very busy.
A big, tall, thin biped is very easy not to look cool when you've got someone sitting on top of it. It's more difficult to make that look good. Now, can I think of ways to do that? Sure. Could I throw that at a miniature designer and say it's your job to worry about it? Ha 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 ha.
Yeah,
sure. But also, you're looking for the concept to be really nice. You might be better looking at, for example, killing some sort of celestial lion or something equivalent. Instead, and having an undead Tzeentch version of that, rather than going for something that clearly looks better as a standing figure by itself, rather than one that's being mounted.
Plus, the big thing for me is that I would really want it to be, oh, hey, look, he's fighting Grand Cathay, so you're going to be using your Terracotta Sentinel goodies, and not him just having like a evil version sitting across the table. Like you want something to be, you want it to be unique.
Yeah, you don't want the Cathayan force to feel like, oh, why do I even have this? Because it's not my special thing isn't even special now. So I think you'd have to be careful.
Yeah, Beard Freckle changes in flux so much changes his body's magical, ethereal, comprehensible formulas be held together. So that kind of leads into what we've been discussing of that he's literally held together by magic at this point.
He's absorbing soul stuff and taking in magical power of a variety of kinds to keep himself going. And he is possibly not long for this world.
Yeah, because he's like material, but he's stretching it.
Yeah. The core component of his existence is probably going to be his survival in the material plane. And that's going to require extraordinary amounts of whooshing compass magic.
Yep. Captain Magnum, I suggest using the idea of the Dragon Emperor being corrupted as alluded to in the Weijin stream. That would be a fun reveal near the end of the book.
It would be a super fun and deeply controversial reveal.
Yeah, we're gonna resist the urge to jerk ourselves off to our own ideas. But it would be a super cool reveal. Sure. I really like the crystalline idea. Perhaps one of these mutations is the crystals grow from him intentionally, and he uses them for big spells. Skaven think it's what I will say. The idea of Clan Eshin going after him to try and harvest some of his crystals is in one of the battles is kind of a funny concept.
I think actually that could provide a really fun Skaven not being shit side interlude, where the Skaven do properly fuck up his plans by effectively making off with one of his stones, leaving him in a much weaker place than he was in before. That's kind of funny.
Oh yeah, that would
to what the Skaven do.
That would be a really fun way to have the character be kind of fucked with throughout the story. If like as he's going through the story, some of the stones are lost or destroyed, and it like deeply affects him.
Yeah.
Because that would tie in well to the kind of the theming that the brothers over the course of their stories tend to kind of degrade a bit over the course of their little adventure, because you want it to be hard for them. Like you don't want it to be easy. You want it to be difficult. Like with the Slash brother, we took a different angle of that he encounters different kinds of difficulties. But the Zinch brother, like losing, I actually really like the idea of the Skaven successfully getting away with one of them, just showing that they are a genuine pain in the ass. Plus it's Eshin. Like if anyone's gonna do it, it's gonna be Eshin.
And if you ever played bloody Cathayans, you know that there's bloody Skaven down there all the fucking time, just ready to stab you in the back. Not that I've been playing recently. So yeah, 100%.
I like T-Ball coming in here just reinforcing his further comment, but it's all caps now. Let the throne's incumbent be ever changing. Yeah. Yep. DJ, so Krell is a corn champion turned undead.
I'm going to go back on that one slightly, because I think that we have ourselves potentially a strong thematic issue here, where the source of all of its power, as it currently stands, is in its crystals and its unchanging body, and perhaps that is not what it once was. Perhaps it was once much more changing, and this is now its new sort of bizarre, horrendous existence that the good old Arabian has placed upon it. And this is a curse. This is a curse that it wants to burst out of. It wants to become the ever-changing incumbent to the throne, but is currently not that, and needs such a heavy dose of magic to get out of its current particularly difficult position. So again, we get a little bit of a stronger motivation if we go down a somewhat similar route to this, particularly if we tie in something along the lines of the ever-changing line into one of his canticles that are one of his many prophecies.
Yeah.
And it turns out to be the one that's wrong.
Yeah, that would be a really fun idea for his Zinch character, and also play really heavily on that undead theme of like he is genuinely horrified by his existence because he can't. The dead do not change. They are stagnant. They're dead.
Yep.
And him trying to escape that is I really like that. DJN. So Krell is the corn champ turn undead. Could there be an undead turned chaos champion? Any reason a Laura vampire wouldn't turn to Slash? Could you do it? Theoretically, yes. It doesn't tend to happen, but you could. I mean, you know, there are people that argue that Kimmler is, you know, essentially kind of a chaos-ish character, because he bargains with the dark gods and stuff. But
yeah, no, that's just no. So we covered this in which thing was it where we covered this in some depth? Because we've already covered in this one where we said that basically vampires are shit for chaos.
Lamian stream.
Lamian, yeah. So go check the Lamian stream. We sort of dive into this subject at some time. If you have watched it already, then go watch it again. But we dived into that with some depth inside the Lamian stream, because they don't make very good champions of chaos at all, particularly when what chaos offers is useless to them.
That's the biggest thing. Yeah,
they're not anywhere near as open to the temptation that the others are. Although I'm sure, as is often the case, that there's going to be exceptions, because there are always exceptions to every rule in the Warhammer.
Yeah, you could. I mean, the End Times did that and did a really lazy shit job of it. Of being like, vampires are chaos.
No, I'm still bitter, but I agree.
Yeah. Inquisitor Thomas, the Zinch brothers, incorporeal spirit, trying to make a new Frankenstein body from becoming a magically potent creature of flesh again, made of elf and dragon, and the Naga help. Once again, I love the idea of including Naga stuff, but I don't think we just don't want to open that can of worms. is ultimately what it boils down to.
Yeah, Inquisitor Thomas, I agree. We although to run to the meat of your post here, so we've got Zinch brother, incorporeal spirit. Now I think it's been made corporeal in what remains of it. So I wouldn't make it incorporeal.
Yeah, granted, this super chat's from an hour ago, so there was a lot of context missing.
That wouldn't be my preference, but effectively building up a new body, I'm not necessarily against that idea. Now I'm not necessarily saying that we're building something like Vision out of the Marvel movies, where it's attempting to create the perfect body for itself. I don't think that's the case. But I think possibly using stuff from the elves, stuff that it encounters, to better enhance its long-term survival and turn into something that is appropriate for the prophecies that it believes it must follow. Defo. Also quite like the idea possibly of when we crash through Elflands, using one of their waystones and transforming that into a crystal, one of the crystals around it or something similar, allowing it to gain access to something or replace something that's been lost in the battle when a dragon tears it to shreds, and then repurposing a waystone to effectively replace the power that it's lost, using all the elven souls trapped in there to effectively empower it and make it live for much longer. Because there's thousands of souls potentially trapped inside that stone, which can be used to be and could be feasted upon. So there's definitely a potential bit of fun there.
Yeah, Ryan would like the idea of either a lost dragon child or Shukugan dragon-blooded who uses a weak point from the Great Bastion to cause them to ascend to a demon dragon. A demon dragon.
Dun, dun, dun!
That's a fun idea for a storyline. I don't think it relates to this story very well.
I'm going to try run with it, Ryan. What we could have is our traitor Shukugan, who is responsible for allowing them to get access to some stuff. And ultimately, the reason it's turning traitor is because it can't become a dragon. It can't access what it believes is it. It can't. It's beyond it. And that is where the temptation lies. And at its heart is change. And it becomes, come the end of the story, a chaos dragon as it ascends into a new form. A chaos dragon, and then of course betrays our brother because it now thinks it is the most powerful thing. Screw that brother guy, I'm the one who's in charge now. So we've got ourselves a nice lovely potential betrayal piece coming for the future as we move our way through. Ultimately we're interested in one thing, and that's becoming the dragon that's within it that it can't quite access.
I actually really like that idea, especially because in that scene, you could actually have some really cool body horror-esque stuff of it literally shifting into a chaos dragon.
And it's going to be an ugly, broken version of it, but it's going to be exultant because finally it's managed to burst free into this horrible...
Yeah, that would be I think that would be an extremely realistic temptation for a Shukugan. Yeah,
yep.
Absolutely. Captain Hydrasaur, I like the idea of this brother bringing hope in a twisted way, as in he's freeing slaves to enslave them without their knowledge, starting revolutions and stuff like that. That's
stuff.
Yeah, that's a good
idea. So yeah, Captain Loosely, we need to start figuring out who this guy is in terms of his army. So you've definitely got something potentially in that. Whether it's the best route, given that we are going to be almost certainly crashing into High Elf lands first. I'm not sure it is.
So, yeah, if you wanted to play hard with the ideas from like the Galleon's Graveyard and stuff, there are two ways you could do it. Of the idea that he encounters living people and frees them from certain kinds of bonds or shackles, and then grabs them in a different set that are not as apparent, or that due to his nature, he changes people by essentially freeing them from the bonds of death, but traps them in. But I feel like that would just be too close to just regular necromancy.
Yeah, it does sound similar to that. You might be easier just dialing into the fact that we've got ourselves what is quite clearly a Tzeentch champion. And this Tzeentch champion is using the great magic that lies within it to, I don't know, pull demons and horrendous creatures from the realm.
Yeah, that makes sense. I could see the idea that like at the start of the story, when like the Golden Magus brings or like awakens him and stuff, there is an initial spat between the two of them that results in him freeing many people that were trapped under the Golden Magus's control or slavery.
Good start.
And
Yeah, quite like
I
that.
could give them like a really nice mortal roster of initial followers.
And equally, potentially quite a fun undead roster. As in all the dead things down in the Galleon's graveyard that are now Tzeentch tools, falling underneath the sway of the new reborn figure of them. They are.
Yeah, you want him to have his army at the start, so I think that could actually be really fun. And plus, that would be like a really fun way to kind of resolve the Golden Magus's storyline, and also could have the Golden Magus end up being one of the crystals of it's a betrayal. He betrays the Golden Magus and kills him, and takes the graveyard for himself.
And sucks a part of the Crystal City, Crystal Labyrinth, directly into it, and then forms it up around the Magus. So the Goldstone is probably going to be the Magus.
Yeah, that would be. I like that a lot, actually. That would be a really good start to his story, and then you would have that concept of him freeing because the Golden Magus has like slaves and stuff. So of him freeing them and being like, "You're free now," but in reality they're not, but they think they are.
Like that. So nice one, Captain. Because when I first read that, I was like, nah. But one of the great joys of these streams is every single comment that comes in, we try our best to incorporate it. Even when we may be sounding like we're saying, no. What we're often saying is, but, as we try to draw the whole thing in together.
Okay, Gideon, interesting. So I was thinking of doing a spider/bird type monster mount that fits with the concept of spinning the threads of fate. So this creature has the ability to spin magical silk, which freezes people in time, similar to like a Neverman talk style, or traps them in some way, and prematurely ages them. So there's a lot there. The idea that that there is an entity that maybe he pulls out of like a mixture of the graveyard and the labyrinth, that has the ability to literally spin threads of fate. That is a very interesting concept.
But to what end?
But it's tricky.
Yeah. My concern is that we just build something for the sake of it's cool rather than the sake of it builds this character. And that is sometimes a good thing, because sometimes cool is the most important rule. And because this is pretty fucking cool. But what we want to do is try and create something that has a very different silhouette to an 8-legged shark thing. Okay, and this is another 8-legged thing. So if we were doing this, I'd be looking to lean more into the bird flying spindly side rather than necessarily the chunky heavy-legged spider side.
Yeah, as just like a creature concept, I fucking love it. But for this particular role,
what we need to do is figure out a way that we can have our Chaos Champion, who is wrapped around with these great floating stones. How can we make that look cool on top of something? What works best for that? I think the shrine that we made for our Slaanesh champion worked really well. We had ourselves an incredible set of different descriptions that different miniature designers and artists could pin down in different ways before we eventually got a concept that we really liked. But the idea that this entity had coins pressed into it, relics pushed into it over the course of centuries before it eventually reached the point of moving. It was like a living statue. It had its own imagery, and also the whole shrine that was getting moved around gave you a very different idea to the walking sharky craziness that we had with our engineered corn version, which again is completely different to the far more traditional toad dragon, massive fucking ogre sitting on top of it.
Yeah,
what we need here is something that makes it work.
Yeah, I see some comments that I'm excited to get to about the mount coming up.
Okay,
but they're in a little bit. Castrate, if we continue with the crystal concept, you could potentially mutate others by touch or petrifying enemies. Maybe he bestows this gift upon his followers and gives them similar petrifying effects. I will say the idea of him having a petrification ability, I actually like quite a bit. That is important.
I just suddenly realized the time and I was like,
I will say the idea that he could use the crystal labyrinth as a weapon in the sense of petrifying people or like causing them to start crystallizing or crystals like emerging out of them. I think that would make for a kick-ass ability that he has available on his sheet.
Love it. Nice one, castrated.
Yeah, 100%. And I especially because you could have like we said, or you could play around with the idea that one of his units is like bodies that have the crystals emerging out of them that's allowing them to animate and move again. That's cool. That's really cool. I like that a lot.
I like the idea of him potentially having like a core cadre that's around him, like the crystal seers or something similar, that are all attempting to interpret the lies and the single truths that are coming from each stones that are around him. So we've got ourselves potentially a fun, effectively Lord or hero level unit where we've got ourselves crystal seer sorcerers. Who have also got special crystal spells. You got a lore of those crystal seers.
Oh, that could be so fun, especially because like if you went with the idea like the crystals are like slowly infecting them, the more they're messing with them. So like it's killing them, but they just can't help themselves. That would be really fun. A giant centipede with the face of a baby and baby arms. That is horrifying. I don't see how it relates, but that is horrifying as a creature concept. So thank you for that. The baby arms just crawling. Man, that would be genuinely horrifying to look at. No, thank you. Hammond, how about having start and end and give him a Mughal style aesthetic and make his mount Fozzik's Flying Fortress? That's a lot of. I feel like you're playing what's that game where you get like a sentence and you have to like fill in the gaps with like just yeah, I forget what it's called, but like I feel like I'm reading Hammond playing that game. I may be crazy, but was Sile the Faithless theorized to be the Zinch brother? That is definitely a route you could run with. I think that's something we'll talk more about in the next stream where we're kind of like tying all the major narrative things together. And
I'm just so because we've got significantly more people watching than we had near the beginning, and you may have missed this. Our intent for this stream is to pin down our Zinch champion. It's to pin down where our Zinch champion came from and where the Tzeentch champion is going, and to effectively chart his route towards his throne, and then stop. And we'll use the next thread to finish off the story, not just of this Tzeentch champion, but to tie them all together with the previous three other brothers as well, to build ourselves the final story of the four brothers. What is it? How does it tie into Be'lakor? How does it tie into the core throne? Does indeed the Tzeentch one effectively rise up, or does that fail, or do all four somehow rise up near the end, even the ones who somehow had seemingly failed? Perhaps they are tied through to the beginning first steps of the end of the world. After all, we know that the whole Tamurkhan storyline was getting set up before they went, boom, world end, because they pulled in end times on it. So having it be a core component of building the end time story also potentially makes some sense or some fun. Or you could have the end times interrupting their core story and stopping them from becoming what they could have been, much like the end times actually did. So we're not covering all that this stream, but next stream we will, and we'll also be diving into all of the Discord comments we've got, bringing up all the cool art that people have made. We're going to bring them up on the screen so that we can all look at them and go, ooh, and and what we would do perhaps differently, or which pits we think work really well. We'll go through all those as well, and just generally say, what does everyone think of where we've landed with our champions? But that's next Wednesday.
Yep. Okay, so I'm going to combine this one with another one coming up in a moment.
Okay,
because these are specifically about the mount. So we have this first one, which is for a mount. If we're going for a Zinch Araby theme, why not a monstrous rock or phoenix hybrid creature born from Zinch Warpfire? Would go with the Undead Reborn thing that we are going with. I will say, I love the idea of like this big rock that's either died, but like the idea that it like parts of it are bursting into that Zinchian warp flame, and it's got crystalline components because it's so close to him. So it's got crystal growing over parts of its body. I really like that. And if we combine this with Fire Snake, who says another mount idea, a giant crystallized monstrous bird, which is constantly sucking the winds of magic into it, increasing the power of spellcasters near it. But the idea that you have, I am digging the idea of it having these flame effects and also these crystalline spurs coming out of it. I'm digging it a lot, to be honest.
Okay, so I also am. I particularly like, if we can go back to the previous comment.
Yes.
I'm way out of where
Reese's
you are.
Pieces 18, yes.
Okay, thanks, Reese's Pieces. What I particularly liked about your one was the attempt to pull in the Phoenix rebirth aspect to it, because he has been reborn. So we've got something that is thematically appropriate here, and possibly not a Phoenix, because if we're grabbing it from the Galleon's graveyard, then we've possibly got some ancient creature that has died in the ocean at some point. It's great fires put out by the ever-lapping oceans that have quenched it, and then getting reborn in fire down amongst the horrors that is available down with the Galleon's graveyard. That gives us a creature and the rebirth aspects of it. And if we can build that into some fun, I mean, you could really build that into a prophecy as well, and how everyone interpreted it as a phoenix. But in fact, it was this.
That would also that would make his fight against the High Elves and Grand Cathay really extra exciting, because the High Elves and Cathay both have very strong mythologies revolving around phoenixes. Yep. And them seeing this Zinch champion show up with what is, from their perspective, just this demented, corrupted phoenix-like creature, where it's like part undead, part crystalline, part Zinchian fire, just pouring off of it. That would allow us to have like a really, like, if for the High Elf battle, you have like this really kick-ass showdown between like an anointed of Ashuran riding a true phoenix into battle versus him. That would be a really kick-ass scene.
That'd be pretty fucking awesome, wouldn't it? Yeah. Yeah, I can see that working pretty well. So I think regardless of what this creature is, that can be really, in truth, that would probably be hammered down over the course of the next so many weeks as everyone thinks
somebody else's problem. Yeah.
What it is a big fuck off bird thing that's gone a bit crystally and weird, and it's not a phoenix, but the prophecies would all make everyone think that it would have been a phoenix. And the only way that the prophecies have been truly manifested is through it being resurrected down in the Galleon's graveyard. Yeah, crystal rock.
Crystal rock. There you go.
Yeah, pretty much. It is a crystal rock. And I don't think that's necessarily even a bad name, as ridiculous as it is.
Yeah, no, yeah. And plus, the idea, like, Araby has long had the thing of rocks, because it ties into real-world mythology and the origin of the rock, and having it just be, like, a really fucking huge one that died some long time ago and the Galleon's graveyard kind of sucked it in would be so good. I really like, and that ties in so well with the character. That's really nice.
And who doesn't want to have a Zinch champion of rock?
Nice. Yeah. Harold of Nurgle. What if instead of having sorcery like a typical Tzeentch character, his magic instead comes from collecting tons of magic items? His body mutates, allowing him to equip or absorb various powers of them. I think if we go with the idea we were talking about, I think if we compound this with the idea we were talking about earlier of that he's literally absorbing magical artifacts, like eating the magic in them to sustain himself. The idea that he could take on certain properties based on the kinds of items he's devoured and such, that could allow for a really fascinating tabletop profile.
Yeah, and a really easy one to build as well. It's one of those ones that looks like it'd be super complicated. But most of the artifacts in Warhammer fall into several broad categories, all of which can be used in a very simple way.
This one's a template attack. This one's a direct damage spell.
It's pretty easy to pretty much whittle that down to just a few extra bonuses that are accrued according to the types of character that it kills, and then pulling in the magic that it has. I quite like the idea as well that in life it was an immensely powerful sorcerer. Immensely powerful, but in death no longer is. And all of the power it's got is working through its knowledge, effectively. It has used its unique circumstances now to start
really like that.
And grabbing access to the crystalline labyrinth that it has. And it's effectively empowering itself with the soul stuff that it's consuming, the magical artifacts that it's pulling itself into it. And every time it casts or uses some of that, it's basically setting off the ticking clock of its own life, because it only has so much power.
Super fun. Like, I could see the idea, like, if he could have like a really fun special rule where he's not a wizard, but he casts bound spells, and he can cast them really, really strong, where they're basically impossible to stop. But if he does so, it comes at a penalty for the rest of the battle. That could make for a really fun mechanic. I really like that. That's pretty.
You could also have yourself, in terms of the character on the table, you could have yourself a fun push your luck mechanic, where I could try this one, but I might get fucked if I do. And then you get it, and you're
Yeah,
like,
it's like
I could try another one, but I might get fucked if I do. And
That's
pushing
like-
your luck mechanics are always
Oh.
quite fun.
I love the idea that it could be like, yeah, you start off with, you cast a bounce spell and he gets like a bunch of bonuses, so it's really hard to stop. But if he miscasts, he's really fucked. And then it's like, okay, you could do a second one this turn. But now it's if you roll a double or you get like a 10 or higher, you count as miscasting. And it gets a little more dangerous every time. So it's like, if you wanted him just firing off powers everywhere, he can, but it's really dangerous.
Yeah, so thanks, Herald and Nurgle. I'm not sure if we've run with exactly what you intended, but I think that the core of it is just spectacularly awesome. Thanks.
Yeah. Can I suggest the name Brainiac? Welcome. Pius Carlington. Going back to collecting, he could be made like Gale of Waterdeep, and that he has power embedded in him that needs feeding, so it doesn't feed on him. I think for us, going with the concept of that you have an undead character that has to prevent his soul from essentially moving on, he has to feed himself to keep himself. So it's a really actually kind of a really fun play on like a demon, of the idea of being that they have to keep themselves rooted in the material world with magic, but he has to do it in a really unique fashion.
It's also an opportunity for us to potentially even have a really fun a little aside box piece of text or something where the similarities between it and say Necrarchers or something similar could be brought to the fore, and showing how for all these vampires are so very different to other aspects of what's available inside the material realms as a whole. They are also just a natural component of how the Warhammer world is made, and they could manifest in different ways. It shows that the great elixir that was discovered, uncovered, is at its heart something that anybody could in the Warhammer world. We're creating something that fits within the mythology of the Warhammer world, very much feels Warhammer and unique and Zinch-y, but when you look underneath it all, you go, oh, but this is sort of like that and sort of like this, and they're sort of like those things, because that's how magic works in the Warhammer world. It's because how it manifests. And I think that works really nicely and gives us a potential unexpected side character with a Necrarch or something.
Yeah, I was going to say, with the Galleon's Graveyard, you could very easily run that one of his lieutenant. Like, if you don't want to go the full, like, you could, like, if someone really wanted to be like, oh, I'm going to make the side, his allied faction be just the Vampire Coast, you could very easily do that. Like a modernized Vampire Coast. Or you could just say one of his lieutenants is a vampire that used to serve under Noctilus and it was bound to the graveyard, but now serves him instead because he's its new master. And that would allow you to have these really fun text boxes of talking about vampirism, talking about necromancy and stuff like that. And
even be our primary character, the one who's the mouthpiece, is an old Necrarch vampire who's a scholar and is very interested in all of this stuff and makes for a useful voice.
Yeah, he would make for a really fun side character too.
Yeah, one who perhaps has started digging into the legends of who this brother is and finding out that he's much older than originally thought, that various stories that are in some of his older tomes are actually attributed to him, that he was an extraordinarily powerful sorcerer, that he was there during, say, the fourth incursion of Chaos and was sitting in the vanguard of one of the great armies that made its way down from the south, that he was brought down low at some point. You could even hint at other locations for those who are looking for your, I don't know, your Nagas or whatever. You could even hint at the various fights.
Yeah, that he's like attacked other places. Yeah.
So out there until eventually the big story, the one it's trying to find is how did it become what it became? And then eventually you can use that when we hit the Cathayan parts and he starts studying into Cathayan lore and finding out that he fell into the very worst that Cathay has to offer. And then he starts putting it together and also teaching the reader about much of Cathayan spirituality and its beliefs.
Yeah, that would make for like such a really cool set of like those like side paragraphs that are like in their own little boxes and stuff. That would also be really cool because that would be like a really good way to not only introduce the history of the character, especially towards the beginning of the book, but like introduce like all the different titles that he's had over the years. Like, this is what he's known as by the Nipponese. This is what he's known as by the End fleets. This is what he's known as by these guys. Would be super duper fun. I like that a lot.
This is a perfect opportunity for the Warhammer aficionados who love looking through and pouring through ancient texts from the 80s and the 90s to go and find one of those old Chaos Champion characters who perhaps looks like it could be this and going, here he was called this. And then suddenly that ties this character that we're building as a brother of Tamurkhan to miniatures from the 1980s, to stories from the 1990s, to a piece of art that we all really loved. And then we can wend it through and tie them all together with fine threads of silk.
Ortiz, not many Zinch characters deal with memory powers and how things get distorted with memories, do they? You will.
Shadow Magic in general has a good component of that.
Yeah, there are. It depends on, like, if you're looking at like the battle game, like the tabletop war game that doesn't seem to come up a lot. No, but if you look at like more like the focused, more grounded like RPG stuff, that's more on like a person-to-person level. Zinch is super big about fucking with perception, memory, and or quite frankly, changing what actually happened. Once again, go watch the LAWhammer series, and you will see a shitload of that. Of people really struggling with the fact that they're realizing that Zinch is quite literally changing memories, but also in times is just changing what actually happened, and which is really spooky. Nicholas Wyman, perhaps he had 8 monolore masters who swore themselves as familiars, and now he's seeking Kwaya Shushling Shashang from his targets.
I don't think that's necessarily a bad idea, although I think that given the timescale that we have, this would probably have happened.
Yeah, I think this would probably tie better into like when he originally died. There was something going on with that.
And I think that very possibly he has done this in his past. I think it's a great idea, Nicholas. And what he's doing now is that he's effectively trying to recreate the powers that he had by gathering crystals, which is effectively going to be powerful magic users or possibly artifacts, or I think magic users are better, and then using them to access directly into the crystal labyrinth through the.
That could be super fun because you could have like a fun dialogue scene where like the Necrarch is talking to him, and like he's just hissing and spitting about how he used to be like a master of magic that was unlocking the secrets behind the lores of Cathay, and then he died at this zenith moment, and he's like so frustrated about it. The Necrarch's like, "Oh, this is all very interesting. Yes, tell me more."
Yeah, I think it would make for a fascinating read in the book as well. I think there's quite a lot here that works quite nicely. So I think just to take a moment, because inevitably we're going to get caught up with a lot of chat as we go. Let's take a moment to quickly sum. So at least that we've got some things definitely in place. So we have ourselves a very ancient champion of Tzeentch who is a believer and has been working on behalf of Tzeentch for a very long time. He is a master of the not just 8 winds of magic, but magic, chaos magic, magic as a whole, potentially deep into not just dark magics as we understand them, but all types of magic that the Warhammer world has to offer to some degree or another. This is a proper magical character who is at its heart extraordinarily powerful. But throughout the course of its history, it eventually reaches the point where it reaches its own inevitable end. An end that it thought was going to be, because it was forecast in the prophecies of the world, to be it achieving the throne of chaos and ascending as a god. And it was very much not in any great hurry to reach that point, unlike most of the other champions, because it's 100% at one with itself, at one with its position in the world, at one with doing Tzeentch's bidding. It has been responsible for roping Be'lakor in and stopping it being the wild rogue that it used to be when younger, perhaps limiting its power. This one has been around for a long time indeed. Basically, it dies somewhere in Cathay and falls into River Souls and all goes very bad. And is swept off into the oceans as its soul gets sucked up with the whole affair as well. However, that should have been its end. The prophecies have failed. And that will cause possibly the other brothers to move, feeling that they're the ones that are going to be the ones that can potentially succeed. So maybe it was in a dominant position and it was its death that sets Tamurkhan off. So we can get ourselves a nice beginning end circle. But that's just a big maybe. Down in the Galleon's graveyard, as we all know, for those of us who have done our Dreadfleet lore, Tzeentch comes to rule, and down there, all things that have died are swept into that place to be sucked up and eaten by the great maw on the other side. And it's down there that it is resurrected by the great Arabian. What's his name? His name has escaped me again.
Golden Magus.
Call him El something or another. Yeah, so the Magus. And he is brought back, and this turns into proper war. What should be the harmony of the Chaos Gods getting ready to take down the world has turned into factionalism on the underwater side. And this Magus is eventually defeated and turned into the first of his crystals that he uses to empower what will become his magic. He is a mighty, he's a mighty and puissant warrior, regardless. But then he gets this. Down here, we get the vast majority of what is going to become its core army type. So we are looking at building an army that could have been formed out of the Galleon's graveyard. So we can get ourselves a lot of fun stuff down here. But as a core concept of what we're attempting to look for here, we are avoiding purposefully things like pirates and yo-ho-ho ships. We'll leave that over for Khorne. What we're looking for is something thematic and interesting from the many lost armies of the Warhammer world that we could pull on with a lot of cool, weird Zinch units.
Really, really good Arabian themes as well.
Yeah. Arabian seems to be a really nice thing that we can draw on. And this rises up out of the Galleon's graveyard into a bunch of islands, which is eventually going to become its quest to reform itself through grabbing the most powerful magic users and spellcasters that it possibly can. And as we know, that it's going to take it down towards the High Elves, where it's going to take out something pretty nasty. One of the Waystones are going to be turned into something horrible with a big Sathraean mage. It's going to be terrible. As that becomes one of the crystals until eventually, having crashed into the, let's get the correct coast, east coast of Cathay, and taking out several dragon-blooded Shigagan. That turns into an eventual assault over into the great capital itself, one that potentially could succeed. That is, I think, a fine, loose direction. It gives us our core faction of Tzeentch. It gives us our core faction of High Elves, and it gives us our core faction of Cathay. We don't necessarily need to do it all. We can just worry about the core part that we're doing there. That's broadly pretty decent. We could then muddy that tail up with what happens between the journey between the Galleon's graveyard over to the High Elves, what happens between the High Elves to the Cathayans, what happens with the various stories with his lieutenants, with the crystals, with the crystal seers that are building behind them, with perhaps, inevitably, we've got anything that has to do with shards or crystals are going to get pulled in. So there's going to be in his army somewhere a shard dragon of some sort. There's going to be various other troops that are
shard dragon's pretty funny.
It's going to, yeah, absolutely. That's going to be there somewhere. There's going to be all sorts of
shard dragon.
Yeah, quite. There's going to be all sorts of stuff that we could pull in for the army list there. I think we've got a pretty strong direction here.
Yeah, I'm feeling pretty good about it. Yeah, and like, you get like some really fun vampire theming from the Galleon's graveyard and like a Necrotic lieutenant. Like with the High Elves, you'd be able to like you could do some really fun stuff with because you're dealing with like colonial sites. You could pull on like kind of modernizing their Storm of Chaos roster, which was very naval themed. It was like the very heavy on the Sea Guard, but they have like a big influence on like phoenixes and stuff to kind of make a counterpoint to the Zinch character, which would be super fun. So there's a lot of really cool things you can play around with on that. And then, of course, his mount being the big resurrected rock that's like part Zinchian fire, part crystalline, and part undead giant bird thing.
Yeah, totally. Him riding that thing in the back. That's pretty damn cool. And we also have ourselves the betrayal of the crystalline forces that he's gathered and how these are accessing directly through to the truths of the world, so to speak, through the crystalline labyrinth. But they despise him. So that perhaps suggests then that when he's first resurrected, he becomes a very close ally to and friend of the Grand Magus, and then betrays him.
Oh yeah, that would be the best opening scene. Yeah, that you have that buildup of the Magus being like, "All right, I've taken the labyrinth, or I've taken the Gallon's graveyard. I've got this guy to help me now, who's like beyond wise and ancient, and he's gonna help me like channel all this magic straight into the crystal labyrinth itself, so I can be exalted in Tzeentch's favor. And he's like, yeah, sure.
And then perhaps what all he does is he just does the classic thing. He explains to the Grand Magus how he can get access to all of this power by effectively just linking through to the labyrinth, and through doing so damns himself because he persuades and betrays, and pump gotcha. So we could have ourselves an interesting set of 8 betrayal stories that lead out. Perhaps 1 or 2 of them happen in there, and then from there they move out to the remaining 4 or 5. And if he ever gets all 9 in place, so that's basically 9 great crystals plus the 9th dark crystal that sits in the center of it all. If you can get all of them fully empowered up, he will rise, and that is his belief. And then he'll be able to take on the great whooshing compass itself.
Yeah, and that would have the fun thing of that he's really trying to build that up, but there are things that go wrong along the journey. Like you get the attack from Clan Eshin where they end up stealing or taking one of the crystals, and stuff like that, which makes for a really fun. Like there are ways to have this character be messed with, kind of like how Tamurkhan was messed with, or the Corn Brother was messed with.
Yeah,
in really good ways.
While we're going through those other ones, I've had an idea. I'll come back to it in a moment.
Sure. Cole Patterson, what if his army travels far from seeing Bane Towers and Winged Terrors? That way there's no nautical themes. What lives above the clouds in Warhammer? I will say that tying back to like the Man of War Zinch fleet, where you have like floating towers and stuff that allows him to get to the colonies and things, that would be sick.
They were Silver Towers of Zinch.
Yeah, I would be super down for that. That would be great because A, you're right, that would help him avoid kind of that nautical theming, and B, that would help it make it feel like the Galley's Graveyard like has this culmination where it touches the realm of Tzeentch, and all these like great towers come out of it that are able to just fly over the sea. And that would help make his journey across the ocean vastly different than the Corn Brother, who had like a genuine navy, and this big, like very strong nautical theming and dealing with all of those elements. So yeah, I think that would be very good.
He was like pure navy, then Mad Max, where this one could be very much flight and floating castles and classic Tzeentch stuff. Yeah,
the High Elves being like, we have these great walls and we have like the amazing navy and our dragon ships, and no one can take our islands and the colonies and stuff. And then they just see this like collection of towers flying towards them and going, oh shit. Like, we're about to be under siege by a foe that we can't take out on the water because he's not in the water.
Okay, so how about a really out there storyline with the elves?
Oh,
and
okay.
have him facing off against Morellian.
Because
Morellian hiked it out of town. So if you don't know out there, Morellian is the first son of the very first Phoenix King, Inarian. And he and his sister were stolen away and then came back again. And then he hung about for a while when his sister was Everqueen. Then he hiked out to the colonies and was never seen again.
That would
because
be
he did not want to become Phoenix King. So we could have ourselves a proper old, ancient, proud elf.
You know, if he was our anointed character, like he's the Phoenix Rider or whatever, that would be sick. Because then you'd have an insanely ancient Zinch champion going up against someone that's older, just barely, but older than him.
Yeah, and you know what I think would work really nicely too. This is one of those ones where we're building a character who's effectively the betrayer. That's who he is. So we could have him slinking into the place, attempting to befriend him, and him being the one that the betrayal doesn't work on. Because, well, he's an elf. And elves are always a bit, elf bullshit. So that one failing, and then him turning to actual all-out war and taking on the entire colony instead. That could be quite fun because we're building what feels like it could be a super fun set of stories with the betrayals, but the betrayals don't all have to be successful. And having one that isn't, I think, will be quite fun.
Yeah. And that would be plus a Morellian model would be hot commodity.
Oh yeah, that'd be amazing.
Give me that shit. Especially because one of the biggest I wouldn't call it like a big criticism, but a criticism often I think that's fair about the High Elf roster is that, like, with the exception of a Lithanar, most of the characters are babies.
They are babies.
Like Tyrion, Teclis, Altharion, Corhill, they're all little babies by elf standards. They're centuries old instead of millennia old. Whereas the Wood Elves and the Dark Elves have these incredibly fucking ancient characters running around all over the place.
Yep.
Even a Lithanar is not that old by the grand standards because he was very young when the Sundering happened. So like having Morellian around would be like, this is an old motherfucker.
And it'd be quite fun as well because Morellian's a character that has been written and rewritten a few times because they screwed up the early High Elf timelines. And it would be nice to consolidate a figure who is a very ancient Shadowmancer, for example.
Plus, this would have allowed Forge World to like make an actual mini, like an update, good, fun mini for like the Arcane Phoenix. Is that he is one of the very few souls that can actually ride one.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
Yeah,
that'd be really awesome. So we've got ourselves an ancient, powerful magic. He'll eventually be the Shadow Shard because he's going to get captured and ruined, and that'll be awful. Because at the end of the world, we're also building an end times here. So killing off these ancient characters is a component of that. So I think that's pretty freaking cool. That will allow us to have ourselves a character who is effectively akin to, in terms of where he sits in the power tiers, are Malekiths of the world. He is, after all, his older brother. That is kind of freaking cool and has purposefully avoided politics for ages, has staged his own death more than once. I definitely think there is potentially something in that.
I think there's a lot of strength in that. That could be really, really fun. Zinch Brothers, Bella Choir. Good old Bella Choir. Vince Blake, what if the mount was a monster mutating crystals like the Zinch brother? Could they have a companion who starts his journey with the growing expedition? So yeah, I think the idea that the crystals quite literally infect everything that he's close to, from like the seers to the rock-like creature. Yeah, absolutely, 100%. Because I think for a lot of people, when it comes to like crystalline things, there's a really common trope that's really scary, but also really interesting, of the ideas of crystals like slowly consuming the things they're touching.
Yep.
Which is Farseer Aradel, since it's in the Monstrous Arcanum, could he have a Warfire Dragon running around? I mean, hypothetically, yeah. Yeah,
definitely. I think it's not only within the remit. It matches much of the tonal points, and indeed we could even twist it up and give him an undead Warfire Dragon or some equivalent, something that has died and been brought back to life again inside the depths of the Galleon's graveyard.
Yeah, the really fun thing about starting him off in the graveyard is you could really give him almost anything and be like, yeah, this is technically justified.
A Warfire Dragon in particular would be interested in what he's doing and interested in the very nature of the army that's building around him. So it could come to him at a later date.
That could also be fun. If like with almost all the Tamurkhan characters, you kind of have a moment where they get reinforcements, and they kind of like rebuild. And the idea that like once he's in Cathay, maybe he's dealt with the Skaven and stuff, he encounters like a Warfire Dragon comes to him and makes a deal with him because it's interested in what's going on, is really fun.
It'd be quite fun as well to have a Warfire Dragon that's perhaps a little bit more complicated than your standard dragon. So it's not just the loner weirdo, it's possibly one that comes with its own cult. And it's got its own surrounding of worshippers.
Well, yeah, like a dragon cult in Cathay, but it's a Warfire Dragon. I'm digging it. I'm really digging that.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah. Gotrek Gurnison, he could ride a crystal spider that could puppet you. Fun idea. I think we found a mount that we're happy with. But
I think we found him out, and inevitably we're going to get a few more comments like this. So we apologize if we're getting to your comment a bit late, having fallen in love.
Yeah, this one was from 6:55, which would have been an hour and 10 minutes ago.
Oh golly, we better catch up with our comments.
Yeah, let's see if we can hit the gas a little bit. Will here says, seize the throne before his death. Zinch returns the Materium to do it again. Doesn't remember how he did it. That would be Oh, why'd you say that? Because now, fuck. The idea that he might have found something, or like there was something that happened leading up to his death, and he doesn't have that information with him, and is essentially has a loop.
And not.
There's something in that. I mean,
think
hell,
that might actually, you might actually be able to get to, given that we're dealing with, given that we're dealing with a character whose core components are betrayal, that would give us a potential endpoint for him when he falls in the River of Souls and it all goes very wrong. And obviously he's returning there to get back to Wei Jin and whatever. We have ourselves potentially a really fun loop that's building here. So the starting point of that loop is going to be the end point of the book, where you find out what the original betrayal was. You find out that the various canticles that it's been following, the one that it was certain was real is the one that isn't. Lots of things going slightly wrong as all the betrayals amount to finding out that it had already ascended the throne. There's definitely possibly something in that.
Yeah, there is absolutely a story there.
And it would suggest that ultimately the betrayal is probably going to be a figure like Bellicor or something like that that kills it off because it has ascended. And brings it to an end and turns it into something else. It doesn't remember that aspect of it. It starts returning back to the power that it once had before. There's definitely something in this. Yeah, I think this is possibly where a lot of what our next stream is going to end up falling onto.
Yeah, because the last thing I'll say on that is that could also play so well into that it's not just that he died, it's the way that he died. Yep, and exploring that being thrown to the River of Souls didn't just kill him, it did something far different. But he doesn't realize that until the end.
It descended him.
Yeah, which would be like super fucking fun, and that would be a hell of
awesome. Yeah, that'd be a hell of a reveal. Particularly if Bellicor knew all about that, and it's something that it itself has been avoiding.
Yep. SC break the incumbent. I like it. You're just like, oh, super chat break. I like. He's like, okay, guys, take a breather. Take a breather. Changing. Thank you. Thank you, people. Gideon, could the allied faction be the Dark Elves? You can attack the High Elves as part of a deal with them. He gets Dark Elf forces Black Hearts to attack Cathay. We use Dark Elves for the Corn Brother.
This is Gideon. I'm sorry to say, it's one of the issues that we're facing as we go through this. We're desperately attempting not to retell similar stories, so that if we do some sort of great big boom at the end, we can have all manner of factions working together for a mega campaign.
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely. That being said, when we talked about like the whole thing where the Necrarch's like going through his history and stuff, like having it where like there's a name or a title he's been given by the Dark Elves because of earlier spats and maybe even alliances and betrayals that he had with them, that would be excellent. Implying that relationship did exist in the past.
And it's also worth noting that Dark Elves very rarely ally with anything. And it's not just because Dark Elves are dicks. It's because no one's worth allying with. What's better than another Dark Elf?
Zinch, I would say the idea that you play with that in the past, he actually did manage to make some kind of alliance with some Dark Elves to attack Grand Cathay or some other nation. And then, of course, he ends up betraying them. And he has like a really fun epithet because of that. Would be great. Necromancer Koba, question regarding a mount. Are there any Zinch monsters that were mentioned in the old lore but aren't around modern writing and don't have any models?
No, not really. Most of the original Zinch troops and models were either the original demons, which were broken up into very clean categories of like lesser demon, greater demon, mount, monster, and the like, beast, pardon me.
Yeah, beast. Yeah.
And they were very simply categorized, and we've got all of them. They've been updated, they've been changed. They become something new, but they are still all there in one fashion or another. The next set of large chunk of models were the various Chaos troops. And there was an awful lot of Chaos Champion models, a couple of which have made their way into Total War, largely because they were relatively iconic and odd and weird. There's a particularly famous Zinch champion, for example, who basically looks like an undead beastman with a big, huge sword. So there's a lot of models that we could draw from, but there's not, strictly speaking, Zinch monsters. But there is scattered throughout the lore a variety of just random, weird, mutated oddities, often which have crazy little names. Could they be used? I mean, sure, but they are so separate from the part of the world that we're dealing with. Probably not, because most of the old lore was centered on the old world, almost all of it. The only thing that we'd really have is looking back and saying, are there any old bits for the Pon Cathay stuff over in the East that's worth looking at. And for any of you that have read any of the lore that was created in the 80s for that, you'll know the answer for that is almost certainly no. I'm going to fend it off with my cross. Oh my goodness, it was not good. Although individually, sometimes there's a nice piece here or there, whether it's the temple dogs and how they were explained or something similar. So you'll find that there's not many fingerprints of anything worth using back in the past there.
Yeah, I will say if we were realistically creating this, what we would want to do is like delve through a lot of old stuff and take a lot of looks of things, especially because like if you're making Zinch, it's like, oh, we should probably try and make like a new demon unit, something like how Nurgle kind of got like the little Toad Rider guys and something like that. So kind of delve through and dig up something. But that would be a lot, that would just be weeks of just reading through shit to try and find a couple things.
I've just had an idea of a really nice piece of art.
Yeah, you also went super out of focus after drinking whatever you were drinking. There you go.
Or I've just got a really nice piece of art where possibly we've got an image of the our champion, who's obviously unnamed, and the bones and the holes and the bits, and then potentially another piece of the exultant, enormous greater demon, and all of the fleshy bits and the great horns and all the things that it would have had go into all the sockets and the holes and the bits that are missing in the model that we have today. So basically the model we have is the underpinning framework of the greater demon that it once was.
I do like that. So one thing I wanted to do real quick, just because we're talking about art a little bit, I'm going to post this in just the chat so people can see it. Of when I'm thinking about like his bone structure and the way his model would look, having this be a core aspect of it, where yeah, that's a helpful link. But if you just like Google bone cancer, it's like this really crystalline looking way that what bone cancer looks like on like long deceased corpses. On the mini, where like that's how the crystal is growing out of his bone, I think would be sick. Absolutely sick. Also, don't get that in real life if you can avoid it. It looks absolutely fucking horrible. Yeah, oof indeed. Moving on to goodies here.
Thanks for that.
Yeah. Hopefully you can avoid it. Jack Reefer, just as crystals reflect light, his crystals reflect time. His weakness being that sometimes he doesn't know when he is.
I think that's good, Jack. Because one of the crystals he's going to have are going to be, for example, Ulgu, which is very much the shadows and politics of the now. Another will be Shyish. That will be looking back to the past. Another one will be Azir. That will be looking to the future. So I don't think that some of the core of this isn't a bad idea at all.
Yeah,
he isn't quite certain of when he is.
Yeah, I think the idea that as he's wrestling with the prophecies, he's trying to like figure out exactly when, because it's not only an issue of are they true in the sense of are they just a flat out lie, but are they a lie in the sense that they're talking about a time that is not now, or are they a lie in the sense that they're talking about a place that is not here, which adds for like a really, really fun element. I would be the slightest bit cautious about making him individually come off as like not having a good understanding of when he is, because that's very much an aspect of like the Red Duke. That's a really important aspect of the Red Duke's characterization.
Good point.
Yeah, but the idea that the crystals and the prophecies, that part of the play of like, it's not just that their lies are blatant, it's that some of them are being clever with how they're lying, of telling them something that would be true in a different time,
which is, I think, perfect.
Yeah. Great. Give them a lot of flyers from all factions. I mean, you could definitely have some flying units appear from other type factions.
You have to be careful that the army retains its theme. And it's if you end up with lots of bits and pieces from other armies, you often tend to find that it looks bitty, not very interesting, and loses its individual characteristics. We want this to still feel like a Tzeentch army. We want it to be able to pull upon Tzeentch demons. We want it to be, for anyone who's played Tzeentch, to go, well, this is a cool example of Tzeentch. Take a look at, for example, Tamurkhan's army. Yes, it had a bunch of new Nurgle units, but they were Nurgle units immediately and obviously.
Yeah.
And what we'd be looking for here is something that would be Tzeentch units that are clearly and obviously Tzeentch. And if we just took from any old army anywhere, you would, I think, lose a certain amount of that quality if you weren't careful.
Yep. Captain Magma, what differentiates Tzeentch's Death and Necromancy from that used by Vampire Counts, Nagash, and stuff? So it's a bit of a... So the Necromancy when it comes to Chaos is really interesting because it delves much more into older lore, because Undeath and Chaos used to be pretty buddy-buddy in older stuff. In more modern things, it's much more rare. But generally speaking, I don't know if Andy will agree with this, but I would say in my opinion, generally speaking, where Necromancy and Warhammer tends to be more of like a very mass event, like raising lots of different corpses, using them as puppets, extensions of the wielder's will, or bringing them back with like certain aspects of their sentience intact so that they perform certain roles. Tzeentch, it tends to be much more of an individualistic story. It's an individual often that has somehow avoided death or been brought back, as opposed to being more of like a theme or a grand scale. Like when you look at like Valnir the Reaper and how he came back from death as kind of like this undeadish type thing, where I think it tends to be much more of an individual personalized storyline as opposed to more of like a mass event. But the vampires, though, the nature of vampires is very different, like super fucking different.
Yeah, vampires and most varieties of undead magic are all about using the winds of magic to create... Oh, my squig fell. Using the winds of magic to create something that is an entirely material event, and stealing, arguably, stuff from the aether for its use. Where when we turn to chaos, it's just all about magic for this magic's sake. It doesn't really care about the sanctity of the material realm for one thing or another. So there is, thematically speaking, a vast difference between them. You could almost say... I've got a floating bit of fluff there. It's really annoying. Get out of my way. It's like a little ghost floating around.
It's
really annoying me. Fluff aside,
one of those Christmas.
Thematically, they're very different, but also in terms of the magic, in terms of how it presents in the world, very different. But when you're looking at if you were writing it, for example, and trying to pin down differences, one is Zinch, which is all spells, which includes necromancy.
Yeah.
It just does. Yeah. And that's modern and old. It includes it all. But necromancy and the style of magic is, you could argue, almost religiously different. They have a very core set of beliefs that they pursue hard. And that is often to avoid the concept of death, to avoid the actual material death, which in many respects is not anything at all that Zinch or the various gods associated over there are interested in. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's it is a fascinating thing that we could do a whole fucking stream on. I think it's good to leave it at that. Nightbringer, thank you again. Jesus Christ, Nightbringer. Appreciate the generosity. Really hope you're taking care of yourself. I was gonna have him fight an alchemist child of Zhao Ming and make Gelt's expedition to Cathay canon in this storyline, and have him frame them as the source of corruption leading to a civil war between the dragon children. You could play around with that. I feel like that would be a lot of extra text in the story that doesn't necessarily relate to the character, especially because that's so far west.
So far away.
I mean, that's a really far away place from where we're going to be. Cathay is huge. He would, unfortunately, he just... Now, like, I think Yin Yin would be a very realistic child to make an appearance. Yuan Bo would be realistic to make an appearance.
Yin Yin is almost certainly the one I'd want to use.
Yeah, Yin Yin would be great. Zhao Ming he's just way too far away. He's so far away.
And I would really like to potentially even use this as a method of understanding her character, because Yin Yin is often portrayed as being particularly, let's say, quick to make a decision. And that decision may not necessarily be the wisest. And it would be really nice to have her characterized through the stories there, perhaps one of the betrayals lying there. Yin Yin, through her swift reaction, breaking it down almost instantly and causing whatever the magical situation is to break. Because she's swift and she's fast and she's decisive.
Yeah, I think that would be the really fun thing with her, is showing an element of her nature which we often perceive as a flaw to actually be a strength in this scenario.
I think in many respects it's a necessary component, because her character so far, because it's been so poorly used and utilized so far.
The scraps of old lore that she has sucked up have not painted her in the most.
They have not really painted her in a good way, and it would be really nice for us to get ourselves a Yin Yin in the battlefield, and her being the one that breaks and attacks it to begin with, and having the story take her and have to move her elsewhere, allowing him to move past, perhaps again with diversion and betrayal, because quite clearly this character is somewhat of a genius. He's like all of the brothers in their own way, and making his way around, but perhaps losing a lot of his army as a price.
Yeah, that would be fun. That would go along well with like how some of the other brothers, like, they technically, win or get through a lot of their battles, but sometimes they suffer some pretty crippling borderline defeats.
Yeah, I think Yin being someone who provides the defeat is on point. Particularly we can use that as a counterpoint to our earlier battle with our high elves, where we're going to get a win, and we're going to have Malekith's brother trapped in a freaking crystal, sitting off to the side, spinning a mixture of lies and truths in an attempt to try and send him in the wrong direction. That could be quite fun.
Yeah, plus, especially like Yin Yin would be so ideal for dealing with them if they do what I think they're going to do with her, if her being like this amazing archer when she's not in dragon form. You have this scene of like one of her arrows is just like shatters one of the crystals. Could be crazy.
That could be super fun. Perhaps freeing the spirit of an Arian's child or something like that. That could be quite fun.
That'd be fun. Jack Ruby, part of his army are parasites, survivor from Galleon's graveyard. Perhaps he's trying to stop rival Cathay's Zinch rituals. That's why he's gone. Illicit want to avoid the word parasite because that's very Tamurkhan-y. But survivors, absolutely. And I think that goes well with what we kind of discussed earlier.
Thanks, Jack.
Yeah, and the whole thing of him running into a rival with the fallen Shukagun that we talked about as well, who like mutates into the horrible dragon and then attacks him. I think that works really well. So thank you, Jack. This is Nico. Thank you very much for the generous super chat. Really appreciate that. Off topic. Okay. Quick off topic. Is there any instance of Chaos Dwarfs actually using Black Orcs after the rebellion of the slaves? Did they completely remove / kill them? Did they reduce their numbers drastically and keep the best behaved ones as slaves / workers / overseers? So I will very briefly just answer this and move on to say that there's conflicting pieces of lore in the Tamurkhan book and in the Forge World stuff. They said nope, there are no Black Orcs. They're all gone. They're all 100% definitely gone. Chaos Dwarf said never again. However, if you go read the Wolfric Black Library novel, it very explicitly has some Black Orc slaves in a Chaos Dwarf camp, which is granted a little different than a city. But so there are conflicting pieces of lore. So technically, you could just do whatever you want.
Yeah. So I've got a slightly different way to answer this, just so we can show that not necessarily the black and white word is the one that we should pay attention to. For example, if you read many books about the Empire, it says slavery is illegal in the Empire and it doesn't exist. Then you go read a bunch of novels or various adventures, and there's slaves all over the place in a variety of ways. There's caravans taking slaves down to other parts of the old world. Slavery exists and it's awful and it's terrible. Two things can both be true. There is the official rule, there is what happens. There is the preferred stance of one place which conflicts with a completely different place. Black Orcs are very, very good at what they do. They were genetically designed to be so. So it's very likely that many Chaos Dwarf, who are tremendously arrogant creatures anyway, would be more than willing to take that risk, regardless of what others who may try to tell them what to do would suggest. Chaos Dwarves are not exactly going to be the most, let's say, rule-following group to say that they're Dawi cousins. If there's an opportunity for them to take a significant advantage, they very well and very may do so. So I think the answer is no, they would never use them, and they use them all over the place.
Yeah, it's worth noting that in the old world, you can take Black Orcs again. So like Games Workshop says they're around, and maybe who knows? Maybe they were only for before the Great War, and then after that they weren't. Who could say? All right, we gotta really speed up here because we are running out of time. Ricky Chapman, undead Quado with legs and antlers attached to make the undead mockery of the dragon children. Hilarious, very mocking. I don't think necessarily super relevant to the story, but that would be kind of funny. Where he's just like, oh, look at it's like a dragon. Carrillo, personally, I like the Darwinian evolution brother could theoretically work as some sort of mirror to the decaying aspect of Tamurkhan. If you want to get there, you can have him start as a peasant who aims to outgrow the dragons. Honestly, I know this isn't how you imply it, but that kind of to me makes for ties in well to that lieutenant / rival / entity of the Shukengen character of someone who is so desperate to evolve into something bigger and beyond that it leads him to corruption.
In fact, Carol, that's exactly what I was going to suggest that Sotek has brought up, and that is that we can use pretty much exactly that tale, but not for the core brother, but for the Shukengen character instead, because I think that works beautifully.
Yeah, thank you very much. Still loading. What if the champ's brain can teleport and transform and invincible? There's an alien whose brain moves around his body. Can think out of the box, though not in. So I'm trying to. So are you saying like his brain teleports? I'm not sure I quite understand, but I will say in the version we've created, he probably, to be frank, wouldn't have a physical brain. His brain is probably rotted away a long time ago. I will say though, the idea of a mutation for a Zinch character where their brain can change where it is in the body is very interesting.
There's a mutation that does that where it takes one of your organs and places it somewhere else.
Yeah, so have fun with that. And that would be very scary, especially if you're like, if I was playing Wolfrup and I was like, yeah, headshot, and I stab a guy and the GM's like, yeah, he doesn't care. I'd be like, oh, fuck. Gideon. That's such an unfortunate name when I bring up Wolfrup. That gives me PTSD flashbacks. Gideon, unit suggestion. Cavalry riding giant mutant birds that look like marabou storks, but with claws halfway down their wings.
So I sort of love the idea, but I can't think of why to use it. And I think that's an important component, and it's also easy to just add something for the sake of adding it, but there's nothing that really jumps out and says, other than the fact it's a bird, and birds and Tzeentch go hand in hand with each other. They're like, happy little skippy girls in the playground. But nevertheless, this doesn't really feel like it's quite fitting in with what we're building.
I would
still like to include it if we can build a good story for doing so.
Yeah, if you were to kind of mess with it of like this large rock-like creature maybe isn't an ancient corpse, but is something recent, had to do with the Arabian aspects, and there were more like it. So there ends up being a unit of them that act as like a Zinch monstrous cavalry. So kind of like the Total War Doom Knights, but instead of just riding disc, you put them on these like smaller rock things to emulate the character. You could do that. I mean, personally, I would probably just make the regular Doom Knights where they're just riding on the discs, because that makes for a really nice unit.
I'd rather just go with discs because it feels Zinch. And one of the things that concerns me with unit types of this type is that we can easily lose what feels and looks like Zinch type unless it's very carefully sculpted. In a fashion.
I would say because we have the big monster bird, I would not want to do more birds because that would take away from our big monster bird, in my opinion. Kind of like how,
unless you're doing like Kids of Big Monster Bird or some nonsense like that, where it sort of makes sense.
Yeah,
I mean,
in this
I can happily argue it, but I actually think I agree. I think I wouldn't like to diminish our core character by making it just one of many.
Yeah, I will say though, having like Doom Knights be an official unit where you have the Zinch riding Chaos Warriors or with all the crazy armor and they're running on disc and they're like a unit is like, oh yeah, give me those right now. They are a unit that you look back on and go, why the fuck didn't we have these? Captain Magma, Cathay unit idea. A panda bear inspired variety of beastmen unaligned from chaos entirely, which uses sharpened bamboo to build ramparts and other hazards that work as deterrents to covering large monsters. It's a fun idea, but I'm going to be honest with you, it's too close to what End is looking to be. End
My
seems
concern
like,
is that exactly.
yeah, End, like with the Tigermen, seems like they're going to be leaning super heavily into non-Chaos Beastmen tropes, or not tropes, but like as an idea for a lot of their major units. So I would say I understand where you're going with this, and it's fun, but if you wanted to have like a panda representation, you'd probably be better off creating some kind of war beast as opposed to like a new type of beastmen.
Yep, I think I broadly agree with that.
Yeah. Oh no.
Gelto!
Grim Gelto. What if he runs atop the boulder mount like Lock? He's just running on a boulder that's just moving its way across the battlefield.
I'm coming for you.
My balance is flawless. Turning is hard, but I make
come up with an idea so cunning.
Truly, yeah, truly, he's beyond us. Curtis, hi, Sotek. So will Tamurkhan's brother possibly get Zinch-themed ogres in his army? You could.
I mean, he could, but as it currently stands, there's no strong reason for it other than there happens to be a ton of them down in the
yeah.
In fact, no. Having ourselves a group of reverse Maw worshipping ogres down there, that's yes.
Oh, actually, yeah, that would make perfect sense. So yeah,
sense. I forget the name. There's even a pride.
Go watch our Galleon's Graveyard stream.
Yeah, it's mentioned in Galleon's Graveyard. Yeah. No, in fact, I was about to rubbish the idea, but I actually think it's a good one.
Yeah, absolutely. And granted, they would probably just end up like the Nurgle Plague Ogres, where like you got a model for them, but their rules were literally just take Chaos Ogres and give them the Mark of Nurgle. The Plague Ogres didn't actually have a unique profile because the unit already kind of existed. They just gave them fancy new minis. So doing something similar would be fine.
Yep. Agreed.
Yeah. Well, Tamurkhan's brother. Yes. Yep. Thank you, Curtis. Yes. Pius Cretlington. For a crystalline undead aesthetic, I'd recommend looking at Darkest Dungeon's Color of Madness creature designs.
I hadn't even thought about that. Yeah, good point. Nice one. Pius. I'm a big fan of Darkest Dungeon.
Yep. Very cool. Very cool. Very cool.
Appreciated.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Mysterious Sea. Copass said, adding to my idea, we explore more of the High Elven and Cathayan Air Forces as they go against Zinch Boy Flying Towers. Yeah, absolutely. 100%.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the reasons why we would want to ensure that we had core sets of flying units so that
that would allow some of one of the scenarios to like, because you want some of the scenarios to have like fun little bonus gimmicks. One of the scenarios could literally just be an aerial battle. Using special rules to represent that, which would be super fun. Kind of like how we talked about with the Corn Brother, you could have a naval battle scenario, which would be super fun. And with the Slaanesh Brother, you could play around with like the World Roots or the Path of the Old Ones or like Deep Forest Battle. So yeah, absolutely 100% agree. Ortas, more of an army idea. It could be neat that instead of a powerful caster like in Life with crystals, he refracts. That's interesting.
That is a great idea, Ortas.
That is a genius idea, Ortas.
Love it.
Yeah, so if we run with earlier where he's able to like unleash power from the crystals to cast like bounce spells essentially, but the idea that that is fucking good. Great job, Ortas. That's a brilliant fucking idea that he has abilities to reflect him refracting the winds of oh my god, that's so fucking good.
Yep, like it.
Y'all are smart, chat. Y'all are very smart. See, this is my first stream I've been able to catch. I wanted to say I love you guys' videos and they're inspiration to my own creativity when writing and thinking about my own stories. Well, thank you so much. We appreciate that.
Thank you so much. Again, as I've said, I think mostly to Sotek privately, I wasn't even sure about doing these Tamurkhan streams. I was like, I'm not sure if it's really the sort of thing I want to do. Wrong. They're awesome.
Hey, to be honest, it felt like a dumb idea at the time. But
we were bouncing ideas off each other just after the what we did not feel was the best landing versus streams. And we're like, well, what can we do instead? We could do this, and now he's like, I don't know, and we did. So there you go. So I'm delighted that they're landing well with you.
Yeah, I am so infinitely glad that literally in the opening moments of Corn, Andy just goes, nah, we're gonna have to make this a series. Like, just absolutely not. Absolutely not. We are making this one stream. Thank God.
Yeah. Imagine if we just done it in a oneer. How basic. It'd be so
horrible.
Basic. Yeah. Just wrong.
Mr. Sheparak. What if after his death, not only is he struggling to maintain his existence, but always his memories? Like he's bleeding memories and forgetting things and trying hard to hold it. Yeah, so we talked about that earlier. That works extremely well. The idea that would actually play well about like, undeath is, that would actually make for a really fun conversation in like Box or whatever with the Necrarch of him talking about that he's struggling to hold on to aspects of his memories, and pieces of them feel like they're slipping away. And the Necrarch's like, yeah, because you're not like truly material.
Yeah, an oddly poignant little tale with the Necrarch holding a tome, basically telling him about his life.
That would
be just one that's a little bit unexpected down in the dark places.
Could be in that scene, what would be fun is if the Necrarch tells him something where he realizes who one of the crystals is because he doesn't remember who it is. Just one of the crystals is like, it used to be someone really important to you, and he's like, I don't remember.
Yeah.
Like that would be spicy. Like that.
Yeah,
that's
a
really fun, empathetic moment for the character.
Yep. Like
that. Thank you for that. Mister, that was great. Hammond, Sotek, it's not pronounced Sail, it's pronounced sail because he sails from loyalties like a boat from dock to dock because
it's not untrue.
Hey, that's a good one. That's a good one, Hammond. That's actually a really good. I like that. That's well done. Yeah, good job. Jonathan Scott, I missed most of the stream, but I want to suggest Moreheg's shears that can sever threads of fate as an artifact that he needs to acquire to win.
I mean, I love the idea, but again, why? Why does he need them? To what purpose? And how does this directly attach to what he's doing?
I will say, if you wanted to play around with that Morellian, when you're talking about his character and what he's doing and stuff, has something to do with Moreheg, and that ties into what's happening with the Thrones of Chaos, that could potentially work.
Possibly he's made a deal with Moreheg to effectively stand outside of time as well. Which could be quite fun, showing why he's not aging. Because elves and Warhammer have a complicated relationship with age.
Hell yeah, they do.
And that would be a nice way of ensuring that you don't need to answer that for him. And he has access to something. But again, what would be the benefit of him having this artifact beyond the fact it's super magical?
Yeah, I don't
want it to tie into the core of the story.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't think that the shears would necessarily work out great. But the idea that Morellian has a relationship with Moreheg, and that's kind of over the course of eons put him on a collision course with this character, I think that's a fun idea.
Yep, agreed.
Captain Magma, as a follow-up to the Panda idea, what about making a war beast, as you mentioned, maybe as an incarnate elemental of both yin and yang? Think Hebei from Avatar: The Last Airbender. Now you're cooking.
Now you're cooking. Yeah. In fact, that could be a really nice, like that one, Captain Magma. Particularly really drawing upon the incarnate element of both yin and yang.
Yeah, especially with the idea, the established lore that we have, that the Crowmen are literally elementals of yin. So they're being this very rare creature that's very powerful. That is a balance, harmonized. I can English.
You can English by.
Yeah, but having a harmonized, it would be quite powerful too. Like an elemental of that type would be exceedingly powerful. So yeah,
I imagine there's a few artists who would go to town and trying to build that into something that looked both unique and Cathayan, yet also showed its clear roots in the Panda.
Yeah, that would be super fun. Yeah,
nice one. That would be a super fun one.
Very good job, Captain. Yeah, awesome. Hammond, did Dawi get 8 Bolthers to the Elf 4 Bolthers because they're half the size? Shame on you. Shame on you.
After you've been doing so well, Hammond.
I don't know if you'd heard Andy. So Total War, to make the Dwarf Bolthers more appealing, they doubled the amount they have in a unit. So now there's 8 of them per unit, which is like good. The dwarves are out there like, bring out the whole fucking artillery train.
There you go.
But that shame on you, Hammond. The dwarves will be very upset when they hear of this. Nightbreaker 325. For a battle, we could have him pull a double trick and having units hiding underwater that shoot into the sky when the enemy turns to fight air units. You could have that as a moment in the narrative. I don't think he would really utilize much underwater stuff. I think he would mostly just be sky themed.
I think so too.
Yeah, that seems like more of a moment you would see with the Corn Brother, where like someone attacks him and there's something under the water that like comes up and starts attacking.
I would be more than happy to uplift and port that over to the Corn Brother.
Yeah, I agree. And with that, we're caught up. It only took us 2 hours and 40 minutes, but we got caught up.
Oh, I love this. So having done all of that, the summary that I did earlier, I think largely still stands. We've not done anything to modify it particularly heavily. What we have done is we've discussed some of the units that lie around it. We've discussed the source of what the core of the army could be. And so far at least, the strongest core component we have is that as an army, it is much more flight-based than any of the other armies. We have a lot of flying units. We have ourselves a lot of flying characters. The discs of Tzeentch, obviously, we're going to have demons in there with screamers and the like as well.
Yeah,
perhaps we're going to have.
Because just like with Total War, you could bring in the Doom Knights. You could also bring back the Change Bringers from Storm of Chaos.
Yeah. You know, stuff like that. All things that very much characterize this army as being largely an aerial army, which is going to work really well when eventually it arrives at Cathay, but it'll also work really well against the High Elves as well. It will march, probably supported by great silver floating towers and possibly a big winged ship or two for super added fun, until eventually it arrives in Cathay. And for reasons that we have still yet to properly pin down, other than he wants the magic like, and that is good and stuff, he eventually arrives at the Imperial capital to try and take out the Compass. That appears to be the general storyline.
Yeah, I would say I really like some of the other elements we talked about of like, I really like the play. Grant, we'll talk more about it next stream, of that he did successfully ascend the throne.
I agree.
And he just doesn't remember. Like the idea of having that, it's not like Alzheimer's per se, but that he's like literally pieces of him are not surviving the process or fading into the ether, breaking apart as he's trying to sustain himself. And I actually think that could work for the Compass of that when he comes up in the Galleon's graveyard and he's like, I know where the throne is. I know what I need to do. But I need enough magic to make this body last. If I can get the Compass, if I can take over the Wuxing Compass, I can literally control the winds of magic, direct them.
Claim my throne. I would say that for our next stream, there's definitely something that we want to be considering and contemplating and trying to figure out. Have we got a thing that you're checking there?
I'm just double checking. Hey, who was that? Jacob. Okay, well, while Andy's talking, I'll try and find your comment.
Okay, cool. So I'll get back onto that. I got slightly cast aside there. So what we've got ourselves is our Zinch champion, who has moved from the Galleon's graveyard across to the Elves into Cathay, is attempting to take hold of the Compass. So we need to answer some extra questions, and some of these questions we're going to be answering next week. We're going to be answering the overall story. And for that overall story, we want you to think about, I think, broadly the following. Number one, how did he get the throne? And who sits in that throne now? How did he die? What were the other brothers attempting to do? Truthfully, now that we're beginning to see it all fall apart. Who was the great betrayer of it all? And why did Tamurkhan fail? And how has this influenced the other brothers and then moving towards potentially their own failures? Is this the Zinch brother, or is this an external entity that is attempting to ensure that the throne is never inhabited by anyone else again, perhaps because there is an incumbent sitting upon it who has no interest in getting kicked out by the person who should actually be in it? And one great other question that I would very much like us all to consider, and that is there any way we can get all four brothers onto the battlefield for some great massive shindig at the end? Because fucking right, we want that. Is there any way that we can take Tamurkhan and have Tamurkhan not be dead? Is there any way we can then take the other two brothers and get them to a great final battle? Because building that all up towards a big, huge, massive chaos showdown would be, I think, a lot of fun. Possibly with less dancing and cowboy hats.
Well, we don't know how the brothers settle their disputes. Let's not assume.
I mean, that may be their way of doing it. It'll be fine. Is there a cool way that we can do that? Is there a cool story that we can build that will get them to effectively have all 4 brothers fighting to take control of the Throne of Chaos at the end. Our story appears to be so far that Tamurkhan dies in his attempt to get it. The Khorne brother dies when he attempts to get it. The Bretonnian brother dies betrayed because he didn't care for it at all. And then, of course, we've got the Zinch brother who had actually already had it and lost it and has come to his awakening. Is it the Zinch brother that somehow brings his brothers back? Is it something else? Maybe the Whooshing Compass is involved. Is it an artifact in the north? Is it Be'lakor is he the one who sits on the throne at the moment and is
man, I have some ideas. I'm going to save them for next week.
Okay, all of these questions are sitting there with some obvious answers for some of them, some really unobvious ones, and ones that we almost certainly will push aside because we hadn't thought about them. But the second you bring them up, we'll go, oh, we could do that. What we're looking for is a mighty, epic conclusion to the entire cycle, so that we have something that when you reach the end of it, you go, you know what, that was actually fucking cool. The story that they started telling all the way at the back of the beginning of Tamurkhan has reached what appears to be a really cool end that's also the end of the first brother. It's not just the end of the last brother or the units that they made in their last book. It feels like it's telling the end of the story that started with the first book. So that's a whole bunch of stuff for us to consider. Also, if you're out there right now thinking, you know what, I'd quite like to draw a picky of one of these things, or you know what, I'd like to sit down and figure out a way that I could get those images up, do drop them down into the Discord channels, and we will be bringing those up next week as well. The Discord channel for this chat is over on Sotek's channel. I'm going to be opening up a chat over on my Discord, over on LAWhammer, and we're going to be opening up one there for the How Could It All End storyline. But that doesn't mean there won't be a channel or a place for you over in Sotek for the same discussion, because he'll probably open a channel over there too. Yep. So if you want to bounce between us throwing ideas over, do so. But the core channel for where they're hiding is going to be this week over on the LAWhammer side.
Yep.
So what do you all think?
Also, for your any artwork or whatever you want to do, you can also add us at Twitter and we'll find it as well. Jacob Broman, sorry I didn't see this because the Stream Elements way this is done does it really weird. But he said, "Hey guys, love the content. Been watching since Sotek's Norska video. Holy good lord, that was a while back. You didn't mention it in the Tamurkhan stream, but on page 50-ish, they talk about dark omens. Tamurkhan is pissed, Sale is worried, but Drazoth is smug and smiling. Is he undermining Tamurkhan / know how it ends? So it's a bit of, based on the context of that, I know the scene you're talking about. I would say generally what you're kind of looking at is that Drazoth and Chaos Dwarfs in general are pretty mean-spirited, just dicks. They're just assholes. And he's basically he's basically just taking mirth in the fact that Tamurkhan's entire situation is falling apart. Mm-hmm. He's enjoying the cruelty of the situation because he's a dick. That I wouldn't so much say that he like necessarily knows what's going to happen by any means, but he's just enjoying watching his somewhat allies flounder. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And thank you very much for the support.
Yeah, thank you. And apologies for missing that one.
Let's see. Litzor Chris, would be fun to see you and Bo having to work together with Yin and try and stop him. The ideal child working together with the problem child. The thing I would probably do with you and Bo, that way Yin can really just have the spotlight to herself, is I would probably have you and Bo show up in sort of an epilogue type sequence where he's talking to Yin about everything that happened. And like some of the ramifications. I think that would kind of like how we get an epilogue scene in Tamurkhan with like the aftermath of Nolan and everything. I think having you and Bo appear as like a cameo type appearance would be good. But I would not have him necessarily feature as like a major playable character as part of the full-on campaign storyline. That way Yin could just enjoy having the spotlight.
Yep, fair.
Have Magma, maybe the hoedown interrupted by Archaon, like how he interrupts the Battle of Zen by Jin in the Champions of Chaos DLC.
Ridiculous as that sounds. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
we are also building an end time story, so having something that ties into that is not a bad idea. But I'm not necessarily saying this is the best way to do it, but I definitely don't think it's a bad idea.
He just shows up with like a cowboy hat perched on his little head spikes. Coach Kirsten, he should have 2 left hands because he just ain't right.
Ain't right.
Right. Fire snakes. Well, Zinch brother seems to be connected to the wind of death quite heavily. Perhaps he could use the compass to resurrect his brothers by corrupting the winds into the Dragon River. Could be a way you play with it.
Really good way of putting it. Put that down on the list of ways of we could bring them back. Because I don't think that's necessarily a bad idea, particularly if his memories all come back and he's much more aware of those things.
Yep. Magladrop, conspiracy theory, totally left field. The Throne of Chaos is Nagash's throne, and he resurrects the other brothers for the final battle. Absolutely love this series. An amazing story that's built. Hey, feel free to throw that in the Discord chat with some further. I would love to see a full explanation about trying to make that work and seeing what you could do with it. Because you could do something with that. So a couple things I want to say, because as we're kind of coming up to the end here. So at this point, the good news is I can just start grabbing random comments. So feel free to post just some little thoughts and ideas in chat as you wish. But I do want to say, as we're kind of coming to the end of the final like brother creation stream, that to be very, very blunt and frank with you guys, this has been such a pleasure. Like this whole like creative exercise has been so much more fun than I thought it was going to be. And has allowed us to talk about a lot more lore than I expected by 1,000 country miles. And even then we like barely, it really feels like we barely scratched the surface quite a few times. I am very, very excited for next week and wrapping it up. But hopefully you guys all have fun with it. I take it that you have, because we also really appreciate the just overwhelming amount of generosity during these streams.
You are
like, God damn, y'all have been so supportive, and we just want you to know we really, really, really deeply appreciate it. Also, that is a slightly unnerving comment. When talking about apocalypse end time stuff, listening at work while building nuclear submarines.
5 years later, boom!
This is for Warbeard. Yeah, please no. But let's see. Cole Patterson, should the Great Kurgan make some sort of appearance and be part of the end game? That's a very good question.
Yeah. Hey, Cole, drop that into the thread. I'm going to be opening up right after this stream finishes.
How does dear old dad tie into it? For a unit, could you do a Crystal Golem type unit? Yeah, you absolutely could.
Yeah, definitely.
Thematically that would work well with it. To me, the idea that comes to mind is ending how we started and having a final showdown at Zenbaijin. That could be very fun. Yep.
I
just gotta work on how to get there.
You know how much I love things to go around in full circles and for things to end where they begin.
Yep. Love being part of this and throwing all our ideas together to make something interesting. And that's the other thing. I am so deeply pleased at the amount of interaction and the fact that so many of virtually all of y'all's ideas are fucking genius. Like there are so many times me and Andy would get a comment and like I think we really would be like, oh yeah, we've got a really good idea of what we're doing now in our head. And then someone would say something to be like, oh fuck, of course. Like the whole like the whoever was that like brought up like the Crystal Labyrinth. And me and Andy are like, obviously, yes. Even though we didn't think of that initially. Like it's great. And you know, kind of goes to show that if you're ever creating anything, having a crowd of people to bounce ideas off of is so helpful.
100%.
Solo creation is so much harder because it just doesn't work as well. This can most assuredly tie into a series of streams where we rewrite the end times one day. Yes. I don't think that's what we want to go directly into. But that could definitely be a continuation of the Wednesday series at some point.
You know, we could return every so often to here's how we'd like to tackle this particular subject and how we'd like to see that.
Yeah, we could. That is very tempting.
That is.
Yeah. We'll think on that. We'll think on that.
Well, we will definitely put that on the back burner. We're not taking it off the stove. It's still sitting there at the back, simmering away as a potential.
Yep. Can we make a character for a faction chosen by poll by the community at some point? That could be fun. That could just be like a fun exercise in creation, like character creation, stuff like that. I don't think that's what we're going to do immediately by any means, but I think that could be a really fun idea for some future stuff. Because I think that could be super fun actually. Absolutely. would say that Tamurkhan died in an explosion of death magic, but you could say that he was sent through time as opposed to being killed. Yeah, you could. You could. I love how much people are into it, and that fictional characters cause so much debate. Isn't it just? It's good old...
And how much fun we're all getting out of it as well. I just think it's lovely.
Yep. Rewrite Gelt. Oh man, they're Gelt. One day we will talk about that.
Obviously needs to happen.
Just don't let it boil dry, Andy. Our ideas on the back burners. Doing this with unknown Everchosen. That could be fun. That could be very fun. Doing some of the not...
There's more than one unknown Everchosen.
Oh yeah. There's at least 9.
13. Oh well, there's 13.
Yeah, so there are 13 Everchosens. I think we know little tidbits about 4 of them.
Yeah.
So
Tiny and like the best.
Yeah. Like Vandal, we know his name, and that's about it. And he made the Slayer of Kings. That's all we know about him. Necromancer Kobold. Also, if we want to involve Vampire Coast, we could we canonize Celostra Deerfen somehow? Just a thought. Yeah, you absolutely could.
I mean, if we have to.
I like Celostra.
Fine.
Yeah, if you wanted to, you could absolutely do that. All right. Let's see. Can't Chaos Gods resurrect their followers since they own their souls? Not necessary. It's wiggly. I'm going to answer that with wiggly.
You've also got to realize that there's a big difference between, say, for example, necromancy, which often just resurrects bodies, and what the Chaos Gods do, and they often just resurrect folks completely. It's a quite different process.
Yeah, and it's like, could they? Theoretically, I mean, like with the situation with Tamurkhan, you get tricky because Tamurkhan was like literally reduced to ashes. but chaos is chaos, and they can break the rules. That's like kind of their whole gimmick. Nightbringers. Only sad bit is with this version of the story, we can't have Zhao flash fry Balthazar Gelt. I mean, honestly,
that is sad.
Yeah, I think when it comes to the Zhao Gelt romance, that's great as its own story, just doing its own thing, as opposed to being tied into a greater narrative, so to speak. If anything, if you leaned into making that a canonical thing where Gelt is like goes over to Cathay and like has her even going so far as having a full-on relationship with Zhao Ming, having that breakdown be as part of an end times event is much more satisfying and makes more sense and would cause much bigger repercussions. Just got here, not too sure where this one ended up. I like the idea of there being a secret 5th daughter that is undivided. That would be a spicy twist.
What you may have missed is that we are going to be doing another stream next week, which is going to be the conclusion stream, which is going to be the conclusion for the story of all 4 brothers and the Throne of Chaos, the Be'lakor element, what happens with, you don't know it yet, but what happens with the Wuxing Compass and Cathay, and how they all tie together. And if you've got an idea for how the unknown 5th daughter could tie into that narrative, dive into my Discord, where I'm setting up a thread right now, and we're going to be popping up the Throne of Chaos finale suggestions, and drop them in there and put all your ideas down there, possibly discuss it out with others, because there definitely could be something in that.
Yep. Isn't Total War technically canon since it's proof against? The best way to think of it is it's its own alternate universe.
Yeah. Being as blunt as I can be, Total War completely contradicts canon, if you wish to use such a term, all over the place. But in the end, it's all made up. I know this might be a bit controversial for me to say, but I've made up large chunks.
Canon isn't sacred.
I just wrote some crap down and it became canon. Other people I know have done that. It's a constant discussion. I meet with some people quite frequently, most weeks, who are responsible for making large chunks of what Games Workshop made. And they are constantly amused by people saying, oh, you can't say that because it says over there. And he's like, yeah, well, not only did I say that, but I also wrote that other bit too. So in this case, Total War is an example of what the lore can be. It is not an example of what the lore is. The lore is only what the current games say. All the rest of it is just alternate readings. It's alternate stories. It's often told from an in-game character voice anyway, particularly when you turn to novels, where most of them are generally from the perspective of the characters that are making their way through them. So, yeah, no. I somewhat controversially said on another stream, and I didn't realize it was controversial until I found a Reddit thread that had somewhere in the region of 1,000 replies to it, largely because it went over to a Horus Heresy one, where I said the Black Library novels weren't canon, because that's what I was told by Games Workshop. And that's completely true. They're not, and they never were. The only thing that was what came out of the studio. All the rest is other stuff that are in different versions of the Warhammer world, spinning stories according to what they need to do. The word canon doesn't really exist in Games Workshop's canon. They use their setting to sell their books, to sell their miniatures. And that did not go down well with the Horus Heresy crowd. As far as they were concerned, every novel was canon and I was a dick, which I thought was great.
Yeah. Man, are they in for an ugly surprise in the inevitable future?
Oh, yes. But, everything that they've staked their lives on will be rewritten.
Yeah. And you know, at the end of the day, that is both Warhammer's, in some cases, its greatest weakness, but also its greatest strength. Because like sometimes it fucking sucks, and sometimes it's thank God. Like thank God.
Yeah. Depending on the story at hand.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So I completely blanked on putting that up on Sunday. I will do it as soon as I leave the stream.
It wasn't me. Yeah. Yes.
I will do it as soon as I leave the stream. My bad.
I'm just cheering because once I forgot to do the poll until until you reminded me on like the Saturday or something.
So I will put that up in just a minute. And this one, y'all are gonna fucking hate this one. I feel
it's a great one.
Yeah. This poll.
Looking forward to this one.
Yeah. So cool. Y'all are gonna be super butthurt. Anywho, that's our time. So thank you all so much for joining us. We hope you had a really fun time. I know we had a really fun time. And this is brilliant as always. So we will be back on Sunday for something.
You're about to find out exactly what that something is as well, and it's quite a fun choice.
Yeah, and then we'll also be back next Wednesday, assuming nothing comes up, for the finale, the grand finale of the Thrones of Chaos series, which is going to be really, really fun.
I didn't put a date on it for when it would be. We're presuming at the moment that it's next Wednesday, but as you're fully aware, our Wednesday dates are not exactly fixed. We do them as and when we're both fully fit and ready to do them. And that will be most of the time. But the thread is up if you want to pop over into Discord. So if you've got any cool and funky ideas for how you think the Throne of Chaos finale should culminate, should end, should draw everything together, go post them there. Again, we're really keen on ideas that pull all four of the brothers together into an epic conflict where they all want what they believe is theirs. And I think that would be super, super fun. Possibly with Be'lakor elements, possibly with Archaon elements, possibly with fifth mysterious sister elements. Whatever you think makes for the best end, go dive in and throw it in there. And again, to stress, if you do have any pictures, we've got threads on both of our Discords for each of the three previous brothers. If you've got any pictures you want to pop up there, any art, any new ideas, go pop them up, share, discuss, do whatever suits yourselves best. But the more ideas we get, the better.
Yes, and because I am going to full on, I've already started collecting them. Well, more accurately, Hawk has already started collecting them for me because he's wonderful. Anywho, that's it for us. Also, make sure you don't miss out on LAWhammer this Friday for the finale of Power Behind the Throne, which is going to be super fucking exciting.
I will say, just as a warning on that, there is COVID around these parts. One of our players has COVID just now. We're hoping it will be gone by Friday. I can't express how much I hope it's gone by Friday. I'm really looking forward to doing the freaking finale because it's going to be pretty awesome. Having said that, though, we've taped a couple of side episodes just in case it isn't, so there will be stuff going up in the Friday regardless.
Okay, yeah. And if you haven't started watching LAWhammer, what the fuck are you doing with your life? Go watch it. All right.
It goes places.
Yep. Anywho, we'll see you guys next time. Thanks for watching.
See y'all later.
Bye, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye.